Hello and welcome to another episode of the Way We Grow podcast. I'm your host, Nick Wolfe. Today our guest is Cosmic of Cosmic Strains, one of our fellow hosts of the different podcasts that we do here on the Craft Growers Network. He is also a breeder, a home grower, and he has also recently ventured into the realm of cannabis meristem tissue culture for his breeding efforts and other projects. Cosmic, welcome to the show.
Hey, long time no see.
I know, right? For all those listeners out there, we just recorded another episode together this morning that you'll probably have heard by now. We seem to have a little bit of a theme in the Craft Growers Network podcast of promoting tissue culture, which I'm not opposed to. I think it's a huge thing that's going to be necessary in the cannabis industry to keep it viable for the next 10 to 20 years at least, if not longer. But Cosmic, what's new with you? What's new in your garden?
Oh, not too much. I've taken a break from acquiring any new strains. I have quite the number of strains now. But I have been waiting on an order, and it's supposed to arrive here within the next couple days. So I should be getting Kim 91, Stardog Guava, Pink Runts, what was it? Dante's Inferno. Oh, and Granddaddy Purple.
Very cool.
I think it's the San Fran cut. I'll have to check my notes and everything, but super excited to get some of those old school strains going on.
What is your current library count at?
Honestly, I'd have to go and take inventory because a lot of my library actually is only existing in my tissue culture library. So I do have a lot of my strains still going. I have the tendency to take on a lot more than I probably should at one time. So I've been juggling all these new strains that I've been able to acquire with the library of seeds that I grew out, and as well as learning tissue culture. So we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what got me into tissue culture and where I'm at with that a little bit later on. But I thought we'd kind of kick this off with a little story about my first time growing.
Yeah. So I like to find out if your first experiences with growing in general were with cannabis, or if you perhaps maybe grew some vegetables or flowers or other plants with your parents or relatives, or maybe somebody at a younger age.
Yeah, I mean, so I would help my dad out in the garden, probably running off, not helping out as much as I should have. He probably spent a lot more time looking for me to get me to help, but I do remember picking up some things from them. But really, my first venture into growing anything by myself was with cannabis. And,
Cool.
I was 16 at the time. My high school girlfriend's stepdad gave me this set of speakers, and I'd already had a pretty decent home stereo system, and these speakers were giant. I'm talking probably 3.5 foot, 4 foot tall. And so my teenage brain was like, well, I have this bag seed that I found in one of the gram bags that I bought. Let's try to do something with it. Now, keep in mind, my parents were extremely strict. Definitely not gonna let me smoke, let alone grow anything. So I was, just being a teenager, just putting caution to the wind, and I gutted one of those speakers. I took a towel and I put it against the mesh screen on the front, kind of taped it up. I installed a little computer fan and I twisted it up to an outlet, like a plug that I can plug in and get it to work. And then I had a desktop lamp that I somehow fastened to the top of the speaker, so it's pointing down.
Mm-hmm.
And I had because I read that fluorescent bulbs are okay for plants, and I didn't know anything about T5s or anything like that at the time. So whatever fluorescent bulb I could find, and yeah, once you know it, I got probably up to, I want to say, about 5 sets of leaves. It was doing pretty decent, and then my mom found it. So. So suffice to say, I wasn't able to sex it, let alone get any, results from it, besides, getting grounded. So, but
How old were you when you did that?
probably like 16. I was definitely in high school. I started smoking around 16. So, I mean, I could have been as early as 17, but in that range right there.
Very cool. That's super funny. Just gutting a giant speaker. I mean, it makes me. What was it like? One of those tower speakers that had like three or four
Yeah,
different
those
speaker
holes in
ports out
it,
the front.
for the tweeters and the bass and all that
Sure.
stuff. And yeah, so you just pop off the screen and then you can get into my little grow. And I think I even like took tinfoil and lined the whole insides of it with tinfoil, and it was
Nice.
super just super jerry rigged. Like I threw it together, and I mean, it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if I managed to get it to flower, if it was a female, and if I was able to successfully get anything out of it. But we'll never know.
It's still fun though. I mean, it shows the incentive at a young age to want to see what this plant did. Had you already been smoking at this point,
Oh
or
yeah, oh yeah,
yeah?
yeah.
Okay,
It must have been a seed that I found in bag seed, and
for
this was
sure.
still when you could find like swag, like brickweed.
Right.
So it could have been just like a swag seed, So, and now all my growing's done intense, So it's funny that I initially sought out some form of growing where I mean, for me it wasn't really about controlling the environment, but it was more of the security of having a hidden grow,
Sure.
So it's funny that I've evolved in a tense.
Right. I mean, it's almost like yeah, it's kind of the same thing, but just a little bit different. But that's really cool. Well, sometimes I'll save this for the end, but since we're here, why don't you tell me about some like your first most memorable time smoking
Oh
um,
man.
that would have come before you started growing?
So I was 16 the first time I smoked, and I made friends with this older kid at school who was kind of a burnout.
We know
He
the
was,
type.
yeah, he was probably like a grade ahead of me or something, and we decided that we were going to smoke. He's going to get me high for the first time and everything like that. So, and for me, I felt like I had a little bit of redeeming to do. My best friend in middle school was next door neighbors with Mark Hallman of Suicide Silence, a death metal band.
Okay.
And I remember being in eighth grade, and we snuck out. And my friend, they smoked together a bunch, and so he was, knowing me and my sheltered life, trying to help me experience smoking. And I got so close to smoking with him for the very first time, in eighth grade, and I chickened out. I was like, my mom's gonna know. Like, I don't know how she's gonna know, but she's gonna know, and like,
She's gonna know.
just unrealistic, like paranoia. And so fast forward, here I am, about 16, hanging out with this older kid, and I think, yeah, he spent the night at my house because I lived very close to a golf course, and we ended up sneaking out at night and going to this golf course and making a pipe out of a tin can or aluminum can, and
Hmm.
poking the holes in it. And I'm not even sure if it was just the excitement or if I actually did get high, but I do remember at one point trying to put to smoke out of the can, and I had it backwards, and I was like, why isn't it lighting? Like, so I don't know if I was just being a goofy young kid or I actually did get high, but that was my first time, smoking. And I definitely hung out. I think that guy's name was Mike. I definitely hung out with Mike a lot more after that, and
Sure.
we definitely got high afterwards. But my first time, I can't tell you if it was the excitement or if it actually worked.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like sometimes it's just like you don't even know what to expect, and so you might be high, you might be, just a kid just thinking that you're
Yeah, like
high. And
getting around with your
yeah, I don't
friends and
know.
goofing off, like it's almost like its own form of getting high, like
For
that
sure.
just giddiness, that goofiness that you get when you're just laughing at the stupidest shit, so
For sure. So yeah, sometimes I feel like that is almost like the same thing as just getting like super fucking stoned. It's just got that same sort of euphoric feeling. Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah.
So once you did this first grow and you got grounded for it, when did you then take your next step back into cultivation?
So great question. Same house that I was in when I got caught. Across the street, my best friend lived, and we met each other because we lived across the street. And at the time, I was in fifth grade, and I think he was in seventh or something. About 2 years older than me. So anyway, fast forward, I'm about 21, I think, is when we took the next step, and He's another influence on people that, I used to hang out with that got into smoking before I did. So I remember him and our other friends, sneaking off and getting high, and me being like a young kid, like, oh my God, I can't believe you guys are doing that and all that stuff. And so anyway, his parents were a lot more lenient than mine were. And they were a little bit more, I wouldn't say like a full on hippie, but they were a little bit more hippie-ish, and his mom was open to the idea of starting a cannabis club, so a medical club. And
Okay.
this is probably, I want to say like 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. So they go ahead and they get all the paperwork done. They did all the legal stuff. Of course, this is stuff that I heard about. I wasn't there for any of the proceedings, but as far as I know, they had all their ducks in a row. And they didn't have like a commercial location to do anything like this. They were just kind of starting from the ground up. And so my buddy, we'll call him Mr. Chifa. So Mr. Chifa and I went ahead and we started growing and everything like that. And
Like with the full blessing of his parents, because his parents
with the full
basically
blessing of his
needed to have a
parents,
grower at some point.
So yeah, just to paint the picture, his house was kind of like the party house, right? So
Okay.
it's across the street. It was his family house. His parents moved out. His siblings moved out. It was just him and his girlfriend, which is his wife now, and he had roommates, a bunch of roommates. And so what we ended up doing is between him and I, we rented out one of the rooms. So I'd pay half, I think it was like $250 every month, and he'd pay the other $250. And so we were a tenant in that room, and we, he had some other friends who did construction, and they put up, a wall to go ahead and divide the room. So we had a flower room, and then we had the main room, which had the closet, part of it where we took the doors off, and that was like our little veg area.
Okay.
So, again, we're doing everything legally. I at the point had my medical marijuana license, and speaking of which, I currently have my medical marijuana license. So for all you listeners, if you hear me talk about having numerous plants, I can legally here in California have up to 99 plants. So that's pretty awesome. And it's really nice too, because there's not really any space restrictions. It's just in your house you can have up to 99. So some commercial licenses, it's more about square footage of grow space versus the amount of plants. So I could potentially have, depending on how big my house was, a lot bigger grow space with just the medical license. But so yeah, getting back to the story, we were growing at the house, and we got some clones from some local cannabis clubs. I think we had, and who knows the legitimacy of any of these genetics, supposedly we had strawberry cough, platinum kush, SFVOG, which that was
Nice.
my first experience with San Fernando Valley OG Kush, and it's been cemented in my heart as one of my favorite strains.
It's so good.
It's such a good strain, and those golf ball nugs make it so easy to trim. Especially from a grower's perspective,
Yep.
something that's you don't have to handle too much after all the labor of growing it out, and that's preferable. Nobody wants to be there trimming for hours and hours.
No. When I was in California, I would either go for SFVOG or Tahoe OG.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the two that you could find pretty readily in the market in like 09, 2010.
Yep.
And they were just always so good.
Yeah, so I actually just recently grew out Tahoe OG, and it's so similar to SFVOG. Very earthy terps to it. Just and honestly, for an OG, it's not too heavy of a smoke for me. It doesn't like immediately knock me out. It's still more of a you can smoke it and function. So I really appreciate that.
Sorry to distract you from the story, but back to this first rented
Yeah, no, it's
room
okay.
grow
I feel like
setup.
we had like White Widow too.
For sure.
And maybe a couple other ones. They'll probably come back to me as I'm
No
thinking.
Blue Dream?
I don't think so. But we're talking like 15 years ago here. So no
For sure.
shit, dude. I'm older now. It's more like 17, almost 18 years now. So yeah, damn, time flies.
Yeah, it does.
So yeah, I mean, we were rolling, and just to kind of add a little to the story, one of his roommates, and this is the time where mobile dispensaries was in its infancy. It was still really new. We're like, oh shit, dude, like, what do you mean you can call this number up or text this person and they'll send out someone with a bunch of weed and you have it at your house like that. You don't have to go to some sketchy building and, go through a security guard and stuff to get into, the old school, like, medical clubs and stuff. So his roommate was doing that, and I guess at this time too, he also kind of got into like cocaine and stuff, and for me, I'm really lucky. Like I never got into any of that stuff. I was always I had like a strict policy with myself. Like as long as it can be grown in the ground, like that's the only thing I'd mess with. So like cannabis and a little bit of fungus here and there, but that was really it. So. But unfortunately his roommate, got into, coke and stuff, and I guess he started selling it. And so, we didn't really know that was going on at the time, but, that's a very important piece of the puzzle here with what happens next. So Mr. Chifa gets a call from his roommate, and, his roommate, he says, hey, one of my clients that I normally, mobile dispensary I normally deliver to, wants an eighth, and I don't, have the time to, meet up with her. Can you go ahead and, on behalf of me, give her an eighth, and then I'll just reimburse you when I get home, And so as far as
That sounds like a setup.
as far as he knew, well, I mean, the roommate wasn't doing anything nefarious, like anything malicious or anything like that. He just, as far as he knew, that was just someone he's always like, delivered to and stuff. And I guess it was like the girlfriend of the guy that he normally delivers to and whatnot. So anyway, that goes down, and maybe a week or two later, Mr. Chifa's house gets raided. And it turned out that this woman, she was actually pregnant, by the way, a little tidbit there, had gotten busted picking up some cocaine on behalf of her boyfriend. And, as a lot of people would probably tend to do, said, oh, I'll give you whatever information you want. Here's where I got it from. And they probably got it from Mr. Chifa's roommate. And so, lo and behold, that was kind of a sting operation. And, a couple weeks after that happened, his house got raided. And kind of a funny side note, I am so lucky. At the time, I was delivering for Domino's Pizza. And I remember I was playing, because we had the PC hooked up to his computer. Hooked up to his TV in the living room. And I was playing Diablo 2 in the living room, smoking and just, hanging out. And not really too many bills to worry about, still living at home across the street, and so I even considered calling out, just so I can continue to smoke and, play some Diablo. And, I was like, it's just a small shift, whatever, and so I take off. And as I'm leaving, we lived in a cul-de-sac, by the way. As I'm leaving the cul-de-sac to turn left out and get out of our neighborhood, I, kind of take a peek to the right, looking for traffic. And I see a whole shit ton of cops gathered at the bottom of the cul-de-sac to the right of us. And so I get all, like paranoid, like, oh, what the fuck? That's so not normal.
Yeah.
So I call up Mr. Chiefo. I'm like, hey, dude, like, this is crazy. Like, there's a shit ton of cops down there. Something's going down. Like, it feels off. Can you go, like, I don't know what you can do, but can you go check it out or something? And, give me a call back. And so I'm going on with my shift delivering pizzas, and 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes go by. So I call him, and I call a couple times, and he's not answering. And so I'm like, that's so weird. I have such a bad feeling about this. And then one of his other roommates, not one that's involved with anything, just one that's living at the house,
Sure.
calls and says, hey, do you know what's going on? There's a bunch of DEA agents in Mr. Chifa's front lawn.
What the fuck?
And we're like, what? And then my parents, they called me and like, hey, what's going on over at the house? Because again, they're across the street.
Right.
And so his house got raided, and they were there solely for his roommate who was selling cocaine. And when they tore his room apart, the only thing they were able to find was a scale with a little bit of residual cocaine on it or something. You could probably tell I'm not really into that world by the fact that I keep saying cocaine. I feel like such a square. But anyway, so when the cops realized that this big bust that they put together wasn't going to come with anything, that's when they turned their focus on Mr. Chifa and the room upstairs. This happened a couple days after we harvest. I think we were ready to start trimming up. I remember on the table we had a bunch of nugs on branches that were ready to be trimmed, and I think a couple jars. And upstairs, I thought I was in my younger 20s. I was a dumb motherfucker, but I thought it was so funny on the envelope that we were, putting our money in for like the rent. I just put drug money on the front, because I was just a young 20-year-old.
Right, of course.
Yeah, like just, oh, it's so funny. Look at this, like. So of course the cops found that, the fucking envelope that's literally labeled drug money during the raid. So, sorry, Mr. Chifa.
It would either be drug money we'd write on envelopes, or we'd write citizens test, like From the Departed, but we'd cross out the Z and put a C below it.
Nice. I recently read on Reddit there was some girl who got busted with a bag full of drugs that on the front of it said definitely not a bag of drugs. So I laughed because I could
the irony. So anyways, back to the story.
Yeah, he got raided. When they couldn't find anything, in the roommate's room, they turned their attention, and he even told me too, like they picked up the nugs and they smelled them. They're like, oh, good job, like before they turned their, so it's like, so they raided everything. They emptied out, the room. Obviously, they went through every roommate's room at that point. Took all the drawers out, dumped all the contents of the drawers on the floor. Like the house was trashed, and I actually went to dinner with them. I want to say like 3-4 months ago, and it'd been so long since we talked about it, and so he was able to kind of give me a recount of it, and I've invited on the show too. He's a professional these days, so I'm not sure if he's going to want to jump on, but it'd be cool to hear his story. Even though we've kind of heard my telling of it, it would be really cool to hear his aspect because he is the only one that actually got in trouble for it. I'm super lucky. Like
what did they tag him for?
So felonies. There were some mushrooms that they found too at the house that from some of the other people there. It wasn't even his, but they found that, so they tacked that on. And then here's a tip for everyone. If something ever like this happens, just don't ever talk. Like you can't talk your way out of anything. Nothing you say will ever help you except let me talk to my lawyer. That is literally the only thing that you can say. Anything else will just give them an opportunity to incriminate you, and that's exactly what happened. So they cornered him, and there was, I guess, like a deputy behind him, and the junior sheriff, or I don't know, it wasn't the top guy, but he was the one who orchestrated this. So I guess he felt like he had a lot on the line, and their initial raid came up as a bust, so they're switching gears to go after this, cannabis club, basically. And so he kept asking him over and over, like, oh, yeah, so, like, your friends would come over, right? Oh, yeah, my friends would come over and hang out. Okay, so, like, they'd come over and, like, they'd smoke, right? Oh, yeah, like, yeah, they smoked. Okay, so you're giving them weed. No, it wasn't. I wouldn't give them anything.
So okay, selling them weed.
Like, just so I get this straight, your friends would come over, right? Your friends, they're the ones who'd come over. Yeah, my friends would come over. Okay, so, but... And then when they come over and they would smoke, it would be your weed, right? And no. So they went in circles like this time and time again, and eventually, they had him slip up, and he said that he sold weed to one of his friends or something. And at that point, that's when they put the handcuffs on him and they took him straight to jail. So again, that's everybody, you can't talk your way out of any of this.
No,
like they're just waiting for you to say one wrong thing, and then they're going to swoop in.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up. Just like tripping them up enough to make them admit their own guilt. Yeah, it's if the cops ever come, shut the fuck up.
Yeah. And his girlfriend and one of his other buddies were there, and they kept screaming at him, "Shut the fuck up!" Like literally, that's what they were. He just kept talking, So. I mean, I understand.
I get it.
Like he's
it's hard when they're in their
scared,
face.
Like this house is torn apart. Like he's hoping that he can still salvage the situation. But honestly, no matter what, you can't. That's what your lawyer's for. So
for sure. I mean, and you were still pretty young. Like 21 years old, getting raided by federal narcotics officers is
Yeah. Well, I don't think it was federal. I
well,
think,
narcotics officers are still no joke, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a bunch of local cops and stuff like that. And I don't even like, I think my mom just said it was DEA, but it really
Oh,
wasn't. Like, she just saw people in jackets and the police
she
and,
just
like,
assumed there were drugs involved.
yeah, I mean, they weren't wrong.
They weren't wrong. Nope. That's
Yeah,
pretty
we
funny.
had some good nugs. But
So I mean, how did that shape your cultivation journey once that occurred?
well, shoot, I mean, after that I took a huge break from growing. Again, I mean, I never really was. There was a couple times where I lived as a roommate at someone's house, and one time, for a couple months, I lived with my ex, and then she left, and I wasn't in a position to ever have my own place where I can grow and I can do all this stuff, So really, I didn't start growing again. I was just a huge stoner, and as you can probably tell from behind me, I play music, and for a long time I was pursuing, being a professional musician. I guess you could argue I was solely paying my bills from teaching music and from playing in cover bands. A lot of really really awesome experiences doing that stuff. I was in a couple original bands. If you guys want to hear some of this stuff, I'm actually not on the recordings, but you can hear the kind of stuff that we were playing. Check out the band Devotion. That's DEV, and then Ocean, like the body of water. Devotion. So
Cool.
super awesome reggae band if you like Sublime or any of those kind of SoCal alternative reggae's. Amazing band to check out, and I still talk with the singer, and I'm still trying to get him to like he lives in Tennessee now, so it's not as easy to get together and jam. But I'm trying to get us to send some tracks back and forth. So,
Cool.
but yeah, let's pick it back up when I started growing again. So I now live with my fiance. We're gonna get married at the end of this year. Super excited about it. We live in a house that she owns with her mom, and we're extremely lucky. We're essentially professionals. We don't have any kids, and we both have decent paying jobs, so we're able to basically rent the house from her mom without any roommates. So this room right here is actually supposed to be my studio. This is supposed to be my band room. I have my drum set over here. You can probably see my little microphone, but I have a full on recording studio in here, and it's kind of got pushed to the side to become my second grow room. So things have definitely kind of exploded. So I started growing again, and again, I never stopped smoking. I mean, I don't think I've really stopped smoking since I was 16. Like maybe a month or two of not smoking, but consistently, it's always been something that I really appreciate and I really enjoy. So I don't drink
Same.
anymore. I don't party. I don't stay up late, but I do love smoking. So the pandemic hit, and myself at the time. Oh, by the way, a little background. I now actually have a career. So a lot of times, if you ever see me jump off the podcast or I'm not able to make it to an episode, it's because I'm working at my actual job. I'm very lucky to have a remote job. So as long as you're in this kind of work, as long as you're at your meetings and you're responding to your messages and you're completing your work or your tickets, I'm a software engineer. It's not that big of a deal if you're not online all day every day. As long as you're doing your 8 hours, you can really break it up. So I take full advantage of that. And I love my job. I love working and doing the work that I do. The team that I work with is just incredible, and I'm extremely fortunate to be in the position I'm at. But I've only been a software engineer for about 3 years. And I like to bring this up too because my story is not very unique. A lot of people out there are working jobs that they hate, and I want to say from firsthand experience, from all the stuff that I've done, I was a musician for many, many years. I worked a ton of odd jobs. The thing that stopped me from drinking almost 7 years, it's actually in a week, it'll be my 7-year anniversary of stopping drinking.
Very
I
cool,
actually got
dude.
a DUI, on the way home from playing the show. I was playing in a cover band, and that put an end to my job at the time as an Amazon delivery driver. So I've worked a ton of different jobs, and I want to let you guys know that it's absolutely possible to become a software engineer. Or, I mean, there's a ton of different specializations that you can look into as well. But you can absolutely learn this on your own from the computer, utilizing YouTube. And then I also use this website called Udemy, Udemy. They have courses that you can buy from, a lot of people just put their own courses on there, but there are a ton of courses that have legitimately great information that you can get some hands-on experience with. But my long-winded point here is it's absolutely possible to become a software engineer on your own. You don't need school for that. You don't need any of that kind of stuff. So, and for me, it's absolutely changed my life. So,
I feel like even the greater point there is that you don't have to feel pigeonholed into a single career path. You can easily pivot if you find the skills and the knowledge necessary to do so. Like I went from being a chef for 10 years to now I work full time as a cannabis cultivator and managing a cannabis cultivation facility. And that was all due as well to the pandemic and not having the ability to continue down one path, but having another path kind of open up. That still used a lot of the same skill sets that I had developed through kitchens and
and you had an
hospitalities.
instructor for that, right?
For cooking,
No, cannabis.
no, I learned it all myself. Yeah,
See,
so that's the other thing. Like
I knew that was going to be the answer.
yeah, it
But
was
yeah,
all
I mean,
through reading and
when you want
watching
something,
videos.
pursue
Yeah,
it. Mr. Wolf here is a prime example of if you want to be a grower, pursue it. Don't let anything stop you. You don't need education besides what you can, you can reach for. And there's a ton of people who've not only put amazing resources online, but are available through forums that you can talk with. And you know, we probably haven't talked too much about how you and I know each other,
right.
but it's through Reddit, and we're both moderators on craft marijuana, an awesome sub, and it's got some really amazing moderators too. We all chat together, and like the community there is super cool. Like a lot of really positive people, and a lot of people who are not just there to learn, but to also share the knowledge that they have as well. So
It's the worst kept secret of the cannabis community on Reddit. The r/craft marijuana subreddit is definitely
yep.
probably the most positive and helpful place when it comes to sharing awesome cannabis pictures and knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of circling back, whether it's learning, software engineering or how to grow or, cooking or automotive, repair or whatever you want, like don't let anything hold you back,
Yeah, it's
take
a great
advantage of the
point.
internet and the people on the internet too, because there's a lot of people. Yeah, you'll run into a lot of assholes and pricks, but there's also a lot of really nice people who are more than happy to share their experience and their knowledge with you, especially if you present yourself in a humble manner that says, I want to learn. I'm not, no attitude, just I'm here with an open hand, help me fill it with knowledge.
Right. Absolutely. So once you did get back into growing, once you moved in with your fiance and
Mhm.
set up your grow and stuff, like what led you down the path that got you to where you are now?
So, I don't like this subreddit at all, but micro growery is kind of what inspired me to look back into growing because at that point it occurred to me, oh shit, we got a house to ourselves. We have these extra rooms, like the room downstairs where my actual grow room. It's right next to the kitchen, and it was empty for as long as we were there. Like my fiance's sister used to use it as like a yoga room, or she had her yoga mat and maybe a couple weights and stuff, but she didn't live there anymore, so that room wasn't being used at all. So I spoke with my future mother-in-law, and I got her blessing, of course, and I was just like, hey, like I think it'd be really cool if I can, kind of grow a couple plants. Here's the California state law. We can have, was it like 6 plants or 12 plants? It's been so long since I've been a medical patient now. I don't even know what the regular law is. I just know my 99 plants.
Yeah, I think
But
it's
at the
six
time,
typically, but yeah,
yeah.
99 is
So I
way
stuck
better.
within the range, and I found out about Herbie's seed bank, which is a seed bank. I believe it's based in Spain, off of people on microbrewery and shit. So yeah, this is like 2020, because it's during the pandemic. So at the time, a lot of people were growing from Herbie's. There was, oh no, I'm sorry, it was from Original Sensible Seeds. There was a Bruce Banner knockoff where it was, I want to say Strawberry Diesel times. It wasn't just an OG Kush. I think it was Colorado Ghost OG. So they had like a different OG that they mixed it with to create their version of Bruce Banner. And then they also had like Dosey Do OG, which they used that same OG, the Colorado Ghost OG, and mixed it with Dosey Do. So I actually had those two strains starting out. I also had their knockoff of Gorilla Glue, but I didn't have any good luck with that. But the Dosey Do OG was a phenomenal plant. Really, really good producer. The terps were almost a little fruity, a little sweet to it, but it still had that kind of OG gas to it too. Again, super amazing producer. The Bruce Banner was almost as good of a producer. The gland heads for the THC, they were so big and fat. It was very different from a lot of the other strains that I've grown out. And that one definitely, the pheno that I picked for the Bruce Banner knockoff, it definitely leaned a lot more towards the OG side of things, and you can tell that from like the golf ball nugs and the structure of the plant. So it was just something I really appreciated. And at the time, my knowledge on strains was very limited. It was like what I heard from school. Oh yeah, back in the day we had some blueberry and we had some train wreck, and I know about AK-47 and like all those classic strains that you read about in High Times, or like me in high school, I got access to the computer lab, and I remember looking up some different, Holland seed companies, probably like Dutch Passion and a couple other ones, and just looking at those old school, bud pictures and just dreaming like, oh yeah, I would totally get that strain. And actually, that's when I started researching. I got laughed at on Reddit about this, but back in high school when I was researching about, oh, what's the most psychedelic strain, like, which is, it's kind of funny now that we know a little bit more about, how people's unique brain chemistry really dictates how they're going to feel from certain strains and stuff. But I remember reading Cinderella 99 was the most psychedelic, hallucinogenic strain, and I
Mhm.
kept that little nugget in my brain for like 20 years. And I
For
remember
sure.
writing on, on Reddit, and people were just like laughing at me. And, at the time I didn't really know too much. So yeah, I mean, I kept growing. And at the time I was working as a receptionist at an optometry. So, not really making a lot of money, working really shitty hours and just doing what I can. Um, Eventually let's see. So yeah, I already mentioned that I was a musician. I was in a lot of bands at the time. I guess technically I'm still in the band. We're coworkers now. We don't really do too much music, but at the time, my bandmate, he started encouraging me to, to learn how to program. And maybe it was just the way that I put together songs and I structured things, and I thought of how to add, melodies to riffs or whatever. Like he saw something in me that where he felt like it would be something that would really click for me, and he was right. I started, I did have like a programming class in high school, but me and my stoner friend at the time, we were more interested in goofing off, so we figured out how to put emulators on the school computer, and we were playing, like old Super Nintendo games against each
Sure.
other during class. But little did I know that that knowledge probably would have been important for me to pick up instead of playing, emulators and stuff,
Yeah.
because here I am, a software engineer. So I mean, I had a little bit of experience with that, but my bandmate was right. It was really, really awesome. And so I leaned into that, and especially with his encouragement, because there's times working customer service that I did not want to do anything at all. And again, this is to paint the picture. When I got into this, is a little bit after the pandemic. Actually, now that I'm putting the timeline together in my mind, November 2019 is when I started programming, and that was a couple months before the pandemic. So,
And how long had you been growing again
so
up to
no,
that
I mean
point?
I started programming before I started growing again.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
but I wasn't doing it professional. It was just learning what I could on the computer, following along with projects, and then
Hmm.
making my own stuff up.
Cool.
However, one of the projects that I followed along with, and it was on a PDF, so it wasn't a video. I had to really focus, the whole time. But I made my version of Frogger. So I don't know if you guys remember that old school arcade game, but it's a busy street and it's got cars going, across the screen left and right, and you have a little frog guy at the bottom, and your job is to get him across the street to the pond, the lily pad on the other side. So I was able to, using JavaScript, program that. I utilized Canvas too. I don't know if we have any other programmers listening, but I made a little, fun little game, and it helped me understand variables a little bit better and functions and how to utilize logic and a lot of stuff like that. And I just kept building off of that. Well, anyway, I would say probably about a year, maybe a year and a half after working on it, and again, I'd like to reiterate, like I was working customer service right after the pandemic in a medical office where I had to every single day wrestle with grown ass adults who didn't want to put on a fucking mask. And it was just like
Or
the
wear a
easiest
chin
thing.
diaper.
And so much attitude. Like I always tell the story too. My first day of coming back from pandemic, I was off for 2 months, which was amazing. I got, the pandemic pay, which was about almost double what I made. So for the first time, I felt like I actually had room to breathe a little bit for my bills, and then I utilized some of that money to start getting my tents and stuff. But
Nice.
so the very first day I got back of the pandemic, and everyone's on high alert. We just spent 2 months locked down in our house. Like
Right.
we're fully masking up, we're putting on gloves. Like I don't know if we did the gloves, but we, hand sanitizer. We were basically bathing in it. Like keeping our distance from everyone. Like if people got too close, I'd be like, "You need to back the fuck up." Like give me some space, please.
It makes me think of the South Park episode where Cartman just has a
Dude,
six
that
foot
would have
stick
been
or a
me.
3 foot stick and pushes people away from him.
That would have been me. So anyway, the very first day I'm back, I'm not happy that I'm in this office, dealing with people after being, a hermit essentially. And I thrived, by the way. I
I
fucking
love being at
thrived in
home.
that
Yeah.
environment. So I'll never forget. And again, working in a medical office, I had this gentleman's file in front of me. So I knew he was 61 years old. This fucking 61-year-old man was in our waiting room clipping his nails indoors. Beep, bing, bing. Just letting them fly all over the waiting room. And no attempt to pick it up, nothing. Just like not a care in the world. And I remember I was on the phone, like trying to help out another patient, and I was so disgusted and like just taken back.
That's
I
distracting.
wanted to put the phone down and start yelling at him, but I was just like, dude, I was like in shock. And that sums up my experience working customer service. Like,
I
bro,
feel that.
we were just locked down, and you're leaving parts of your body behind. What the fuck, man? So, yeah, I mean,
That's
there's a lot
gross.
of periods when I was working there that I didn't have it in me to go in and after getting yelled at, by people who don't want to put on a mask, and all sorts of stuff, dealing with all those, just childish adults, coming home and then working on your computer. Sometimes you just want to go home and relax. So there's a lot of periods where I just want to work on, my programming. So I'm so fortunate that my friend was able to, continuously encourage me,
That
like,
is
oh,
cool.
how's the programming going? Oh, haven't been doing too much. Well, let's just take a second. Let me tell you about this one thing. And then he would like tell about like the, some sort of technology that would get me all pumped up and inspired again. And then I'm
Like,
back to
oh
work.
shit, I want to go learn. Yeah. That's cool.
Eventually, he'd been working at this company for a couple of years at that point, and he was extremely happy. And at that point, he let me know that this other company he interviewed with, was looking for, a programmer. They're a 10-year startup, which is really bad to be a startup for that long. And he'd known from other programmers that they had cash flow problems, and there's been a couple times where they had employees hold on to the paycheck and blah blah blah. But the one thing about programming is most companies don't care if you have the education for it. They only care if you have the ability to program. So one of the most important things, besides putting together a portfolio where you can show off some of the projects you've worked on, and I mean some, not all, because nobody wants to click through 1,000 different iterations of these calculators you made or whatever it is.
Sure.
But one of the biggest things that can help you get a career in programming is experience. And so I knew that, yeah, I'm probably not going to be paid what I should be paid as a junior developer. There's known cash flow problems, like it is what it is, So I basically,
But it was an entry level position, something to get your foot in the door.
I mean, it could be seen as an entry level position, but I was the full time programmer.
Wow.
So I was what's known as full stack, which so there's front end and back end. Front end, when you go to a website, is what you're seeing. It's the version of that website that's being downloaded on your phone. And then the back end is on a separate computer that your computer can reach out and make requests to and get responses of data back and forth. So
Right.
that's the back end. And they're usually, like two different technologies. And a full stack developer can work on both aspects, the front end and the back end.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't know that. That's cool.
yeah.
I've heard full stack. I didn't know that. That's what
So
it meant.
full stack developers can do front end, which is the UI, the user interface, which also encompasses UX, which is user experience. So you develop things that people can click on, they can interact with, they can utilize that interface to get data from their back end. And just a side note, I know we're supposed to be talking about weed and stuff, but I love technology too. It's a lot of fun, and we'll loop this back too, by the way, with Cosmic Strains, because
For sure.
I
Because
use
you built
this.
your own website.
I built my own website, so
Yeah.
we'll talk about
Well,
that for a
so
little bit too.
let's reel it back in then a little bit to the cannabis stuff, because I think that is a great story, and I feel like that journey alone does show people that they can not only pursue something that they're passionate about, that they've spent their entire life enjoying, cannabis, as well as pursue something that allows them to enjoy those things in life, without the limitations of being burnt out at the end of a day of a customer service job that pays shitty, and that you're just emotionally and mentally, done by the end of the day. You don't want it. You don't want to go home and start working on some passion project because you're spent. So it's really cool to show that, like, following something that you do have this desire to do, as it helps when you have a job that can support that as well. It's hard
100%.
to find though, and we just had a recent guest where it's going to come to me, but Russ, Spartan Grown, he was able to translate his experience from one job of working shipping and receiving, as well as his passion with cannabis. And now he works for and helps with distribution for Grandmaster LEDs. So it is really awesome to see when people can kind of combine those two things together and help, like, not only their personal, what they want in life, but also, the necessities of living in a capitalistic market. So that's really cool.
Bills to pay.
Bills to pay. Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I got a little sidetracked there, but my main point of talking about my jump into software developing was the financial freedom at first that came with that. So I was able to continue to buy more packs of seeds, at the point, and so I would say October, yeah, like October of 2021 is when I got my job as a software engineer for the first time. And at that time, I had been just scraping by, barely making it. I think I had maybe 2 tenths, and maybe a couple different strains. Nothing too. It was a big deal when I got a new pack of seeds. And then eventually I got that job as a software engineer, and I remember being able to really splurge on some of the seed packs I had my eye on. And I kept amassing this collection of seeds, and at a certain point, and I'd already gotten my medical license. At a certain point, I started dabbling with breeding, because at that point I found some phenos that I felt were really special. So I really was highly focused on preserving those genetics in one way or another, and my understanding of breeding was very limited. At the time, it was more of what we learned about in middle school with Mendel and dominant and recessive genes and things like that. But I knew that the majority of the weed, I mean, I would say all the weed that I was growing was very high potency. So even if it didn't display a lot of the characteristics that I found appealing in those particular phenos, that it would have some form of that plant inside those seeds that came from it. So to
So
me,
before we get into some of your breeding practices, actually, I want to rewind it just a little bit.
yeah,
Because I feel like before you get into breeding, you got to make sure that you can grow a plant, right? And
mhm,
so when you were growing at the house back in the day that had gotten raided,
yep.
what style of growing were you using, and what practices did you take from that into your new growing venture once you got situated in this new housing space with your fiance and
hmm
decided to start growing in tents?
Yeah, so I have been a little unfortunate where I haven't had really any in real life gromies. It's kind of changed here. You know, um, in the last couple of years and stuff, but when Mr. Chief and I started growing back in the day, we knew very little. And I don't even remember where we learned about it, but we learned about the Fox Farms trio. And so at the time, I was just doing the best I could. We utilized distilled water. We didn't know about pH or anything like that, and we followed the chart. And we were not growing at anything near what we probably could have done if we knew what we were doing. But we are determined to figure it out. We had some high pressure sodium lights that we got from the local grow shop. So this was a little bit. I mean, I feel like LEDs were available at the time, but they were still in its infancy, where the technology wasn't really defined. Well, it was very expensive, and I remember hearing at the time that they were not worth their salt in comparison to the other types
For
of
sure.
lights that you could get. So we went with HPS, and yeah, it was just the Fox Farms trio. Using Happy Frog soil, and was it Grow Big, Big Bloom, and Tiger Bloom? Those
Yep.
three. And here I am. We're at almost 5 years of me starting back of growing again. Because about March is when it's going to be the 5 year mark, and I'm still on the Fox Farms trio. And that being said, I'm not here to say that that's the best way to grow. Not at all. It's more of just if it's not even if it's don't broke, don't fix it. It's more of if it's working, then it's fine. You can look through my Reddit account or my Instagram. You can see some of the nugs that I've grown, and I mean they look great. And I'll tell you from firsthand, they smoke great too. So I mean nothing against the Fox Farms trio, but me personally, and after meeting Gabby, and I've had a lot of conversations with Gabby about hydroponics. I'm gearing up to slowly transfer, or move my room over to hydroponics. So one of the things that one of my current struggles right now is figuring out how to do the frame for a flow tray that will not take off too much of the height. Because when you're growing in a tent, you have a limited amount of height. So I don't want to, a third of the tent to be, flow table. So
For sure. You use a condensate pump so that you use a very small catch reservoir with a float valve on the condensate pump, and then you just pump it out of the tent into a larger reservoir for your catchment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that
So I mean, I have the
those
only
work
things
pretty
I'm
well.
missing is my table frame and then the flow trays. Everything else, I have pumps. I have the sump pump, with the valve where it will automatically kick on if the valve gets to a certain level, and again, my room is right next to our kitchen, so. Once my fiance and I get married at the end of the year, we're going to be looking to buy her mom out of this house. So it'll be her in my house. And then at that time, I can, consider, of course, with my fiance's blessing, never do stuff without, talking to the missus.
Happy spouse, happy house.
Exactly. Um, but yeah, there's the potential of, setting up some sort of drainage system in that room that drains into the kitchen sink or the plumbing below the kitchen sink.
Yeah,
So that would be ideal where I can, kind of do was it float away system where
the drain to
essentially
waste. Yeah,
drain to waste. Exactly. So yeah, like all the nutrients that you feed on your plants, they all drain to a reservoir. Nothing that you're feeding your plants touches the other plants. And it's a one and done, So I've actually read that it utilizes a lot less of your hydroponics mixture in the water than a normal kind of recycling reservoir would do. So that's kind of interesting. But
you have like less maintenance required because with the recirculating reservoirs, where it's like you either top feeding and then capturing it, or ebb and flow systems where you're saturating from the bottom up of the media, you do have to adjust and monitor the pH and usually top it off with fresh water pretty regularly. Whereas you can set a nice reservoir, and as long as you're using clean source water and then you're buffering that water accurately so that it doesn't swing the pH too much over time, you can usually let those sit, depending on the temperature, of course, for anywhere from 3 to 5 days, and be able to continuously feed your plants off of that. So you can really go long periods of time without having to physically need to be there, especially if you set up either timers or Wi-Fi plugs or anything that will allow you to then control the irrigation equipment or otherwise.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I mean, I love hydroponics personally, but I also love living soil grows. And some of the first plants that I remember growing where I was like, I'm going to try and grow the biggest plants possible. It was like tomatoes and stuff, and then cannabis at one point as well. But it was all either the Fox Farm Ocean Forest soil or the Happy Frog soil with the 3-part Tiger Bloom, Big Bloom, and
Hmm.
Big Bud, or whatever those three are.
Grow big.
Or
Yeah,
Grow Big.
yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
there
You
you
got
go.
it.
Yeah, those always worked great, especially for tomatoes and stuff. Like you could grow huge tomatoes with that.
Yeah. But again, like I said before, it works. It's a relatively easy system to be able to understand and to be able to pull off. But it's not the best, So I'm looking to expand. One thing I did want to talk about too, because I did make a post on this back when I was first growing, and again, I got laughed on microgrowery. So all the homies hate microgrowery.
Micro
But
clownery.
for real, dude, fuck those guys. Anyway, I was concerned about like sourcing water, because again, pulling on my knowledge from back when we tried to start that medical dispensary back in the day, we were using distilled water, and at the time I was like, okay, well that's what we used, and so I started doing that, which is very not only time consuming to try to gather a ton of gallons of waters and store it and stuff, but it can kind of add up after a time. So eventually I started looking a little bit more into sourcing water and figuring out, and I learned about, depending on your community, you should be able to look up your water district's water report. And so I did that. I did the one that was very close to my house, and you'd be surprised at all the chemicals that have to go in to sanitize our water and to disinfect it and to make it to something that we can consume without getting sick.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people know about chlorine, which you can very easily not really burn off, but you can kind of bubble off with your air stone overnight and stuff like that. But my concern was like all that other stuff that they're putting in, and it's probably fine. I mean, we're drinking it, but if we're trying to grow as cleanly as possible, and we're trying to feed our plants, using water that's not going to harm them. I wanted to know, like, what can I really do to source that water at home and make it an easier chore for me. So I ended up getting some carbon filters that you can buy on Amazon or something, or ideally you're going to want to look at whatever website they come from, because fuck Amazon and fuck all those billionaires. So I got that carbon filter, and I was using that to basically do like a pre-filtration to my water, and then bubbling off the chlorine.
Basically like a Brita filter or something along those lines.
Kind of like that, yeah.
Cool.
So I mean, it has all the different forms of sediment inside that. Like you can look on YouTube and find videos of people in the wilderness who make their own like filters, just to show like how much cleaner the water looks after running through it. So it's something like that. But again, it uses like carbon in it and all that stuff. But yeah, so one other thing about that method is not only does it strip all, the majority of whatever the water district adds to it, but it also takes out some calcium, and our plants need that. So I add the calcium back in by doing the CalMag plus zinc, I think it is. And that's from...
Plus iron.
You know what? I have my notes here.
Is it like the Botanicare CalMag?
Botanicare, there it is.
Yeah, it's
there it is.
calcium, nitrate, magnesium, and iron.
Is it iron? Yeah, you're right. It's iron. It's not zinc. I always say zinc, but I'm wrong. It's iron. So yeah, I add that back in. So basically, I have 4 things that I add, to my water, and I just follow the Fox Farms, soil guide. By the way, I've learned a lot as I've done this. I've learned a lot by doing as well. So just about any mistake that you can make, I've probably made it. So the main thing about making mistakes is learning from it. So
Absolutely.
I'll say this: be very careful about the feeding schedule that you grab, because there was one point when I was like, okay, so just because we've talked a lot about my history, when I first started growing, I was scraping by. So a lot of times I would do half feeding, and I would almost never feed fully, because I was trying to make my nutrients last as long as possible before I had to buy, another batch. And so there's a period where after years of doing that, I was like, oh shit, like I'm a software engineer now. I can, afford to feed my plants the way that they need to be fed. And, so I was probably stony. I looked up the feeding schedule. I didn't fucking realize that it was for hydroponics. And so for a whole feeding, or actually a whole run, I was overfeeding my plants like crazy. It ended up like my veg plants were kind of around the same of what it should have been. So they look fine, but my flowers were just like awful, dude. Like so many dead leaves, and I was like, "What the hell is going on?" I couldn't figure it out, and I finally was
That's right.
like,
I forgot they have the
like,
2
look at
different
it, and I was
charts
like, oh,
for
this
the
is for
soil,
hydroponics.
and yeah,
Man.
that's so funny because when I first started growing, I wanted to do hydroponics because I was like, this seems, because initially, like I had grown, plants here and there throughout the years, but I didn't really go hard into it until I needed to pivot my career. So I knew that hydroponics would be probably the most widely used source of nutrients when growing in a commercial scale, based on all the research that I had been doing at that point, just by looking online at forums and stuff. And I saw that 3-part nutrients were really popular, where you have your bloom, your veg, and then your micro nutrients or whatever. And usually like the micronutrients has your nitrogen and stuff in it too. So I use like the Cultivation Nation 3 parts from Fox Farm still, because I had already had so much success with the Fox Farm original trio when growing all the other vegetables and stuff that I had grown throughout the years. And so, yeah, I when I looked at that, it was only built for hydroponics. And then I remember looking back at the other trio and seeing that they had the hydroponic feeding and the soil based feeding, and they were vastly different.
Yeah, so I learned the hard way. But
Fair
luckily,
enough. We
you know,
all burn
like
plants.
what was that?
We all burn
Oh,
plants.
yeah, they were sure burned. But yeah, I figured it out, and you know, there was another time where I had issues with my pH. It took me a while to figure out that at first when I first started, moving away from distilled water, I was pHing my water and then adding nutrients in, and not realizing like
How acidic it would go.
the order matters. Because the nutrients that you add in will absolutely affect your pH. Another thing I had to learn the hard way is your pH will drift after a while. So you want to mix your nutrients at least, they say like 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And that's probably for like when you add pH for it to fully affect it. But honestly, I would wait like an hour or two, and I'd let it bubble. And because I mean, even after that 20 minutes, if you take another 40 minutes or so and measure your pH again, you're going to notice that it's still going up. So there's going to be a certain point where your pH is going to be relatively steady. It's not going to be changing as quickly. And so, that's just another thing I kind of figured out over time. So let's kind of circle back to the grow story. So we were talking about me just getting into breeding. And for me, it was a form of just saving the genetics that I used all my hard-earned receptionist dollars on, and the plants that I really worked on making sure that I kept alive for all that time, and I had knowledge on cloning, of course, from back when we tried to do the medical cannabis club. But I still just, because I felt like everything was really special, I felt the need to try to preserve it in, the form of seeds. So the very first time that I went into breeding, I grew out a regular pack of It's It from Exotic Genetics, and that is gelato. I'm not sure what cut of gelato, it just says gelato. Gelato times mint chocolate chip, which is another one of Exotic's signature strains. So I thought that was like a very decent one to kind of get into. I mean, I don't think I had gelato at that time. I just knew like the reputation of that, and I knew that from everything I saw on Reddit that Exotic Genetics was a pretty solid company. So I figured it was a pretty safe bet to choose that strain, even though I didn't know too much about it. And let's jump into breeding. So I grew that one out, and the nugs were, I would say they weren't like anything like extraordinary, where it was just out of like just super unique. It was more of just like standard, like, yeah, it's super potent, it produces really well, it's relatively like a medium plant, so it's great for tent growing, but it's, I don't want to say bland, but it seems more of just kind of like, yeah, it's just like kind of like all the other weed around. So with that being said, I felt like it would make like a really good vehicle to maybe pass on some of the more unique traits from the other plants. And again, I didn't know too much about recessive or dominant genes. It was more like, hey, let's just jump in. Like,
Sometimes you
there's,
got to throw it all at a wall and see what sticks.
for real, dude. And a lot of the stuff that I do is kind of like, let's just, the only way you can start learning is by getting in and doing it. So that's what I did. Is I jumped in, and I ended up growing out a bunch of different other strains that were regulars and selecting males. I typically like to find the males that show their sex pretty early, and then when you flower them out, that they drop pollen relatively early. For me, that's a good indication that the genetics from that are going to be a little bit more faster finishing for flower times.
That's so funny that you choose for early flowering males as well. That's how I choose for males.
Yeah.
But like I'll hear from so many other breeders that have been doing it for a long time that they always say like, you don't want to choose the male that shows last, but you definitely don't want to choose the first 5 that show. And they say that that's due to potential instability. But for me, I'm just like, if you can keep it in a vegetative cycle where it's not showing a lot of its sexual parts, I'm not too worried about it. But that's fascinating that you also choose the early flowers, because that's what I always wanted, faster flowers. Like I wanted it to show its flower early, and because usually that means that you'll find something within there if it's a 65-day strain, right? But it doesn't start showing till day 21. Well, if you can get it to start showing at day 10 or 14, then maybe you now have a 59-day strain. And I was always aiming for my efforts whenever I've done like a small breeding project was, how can I make something out of this commercially viable so that it can be, or even for home growers, no one wants to grow a strain that takes way too long. It's that much longer. There's that much more risk for error.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the way that my room downstairs is set up is 3 tents. Technically 4 because I have a little 2 by 3 foot, like that's my little clone tent, which is awesome. I love having a little clone tent, a tent just for my little domes.
Yeah.
But ideally, I have a 4 by 4 tent, I have a 3 by 3 tent, and a 2 by 4 tent. And the 2 by 4 tent would act as my veg tent, and then the other tents would be offset by a month, but they're my flower tents. So ideally, if you have a strain that finishes in 8 weeks, then with that setup, you're harvesting once a month.
Right.
So that's what I was shooting for. And I do want to point out too that the way that I've done things in the past isn't necessarily the way that I'm going to continue to do things. It's been an evolution of who I am as a grower, and and the things that I've learned and the things that I'm doing. So yeah, I mean, I did that first run with It's It. I grew out some of those strains, and I had some really really nice plants that I got out of that. Overdosey was one of them. You might see that on my site. I don't have Overdosey itself available, but I have a lot of mixtures with that plant. So like Overdosey OG, and I forget all the. I mean, I came up with so many fucking names. I forget all the shit that I wrote down.
That's the fun part.
It is. You could tell some of them I got a little lazy for, but some of the names that I came up with, I'm extremely proud of. Like Ectoplasm. That's one of the strains that I'm probably going to end up taking past F1. So yeah, that being said, all the strains available on my site are F1s. I do want to move on to making stable lines and everything like that, but I'm still in the beginning of what I hope to accomplish, and everything just takes time. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but yeah, kind of going back, I did the It's It, and then I had a couple other seed runs that I did where I was practicing other pollination techniques. So there's one technique that you can, if you collect the pollen ahead of time, you can actually utilize, and I know we've talked about this before, but a paintbrush, and you can paint on the little buds very carefully because that pollen likes to fly. And you got to make sure you don't move a lot, create a lot of airflow and stuff, but very, very gently. Do I have a pen here? Very gently, I can take my little paintbrush here and just barely paint it on the bud, and you'll know if your buds accepted the pollen because after a day or so, your pistil is going to shrink and it's going to turn almost like a brown instead of like the orange it typically shows. But I would go ahead and I would paint a couple buds on a single branch, and then I would grab a paper lunch bag and I would put it over the bud and I would tape it and leave it like that for 3 to 5 days. And at that point, the pollen's not supposed to be viable anymore. It's not supposed to cross-pollinate into the other branches. But you can utilize that technique very carefully and on one plant have multiple different crosses, on each different branch. So I tried that technique too, and I did another, seed run like that where I made a ton of different crosses. And so I was having a blast. I was feeling pretty good about myself. And so I would go down to the hydro store and I would, just kind of shoot the shit with the guys there. And eventually I kind of gave them some of the seeds that I made and like, hey, this is, I'm just doing for fun. And they got super excited. And at that point they were encouraging me to open up like a seed company, And so very naively I said, okay, let's do it. And by let's, I mean, I'll do it. So, I noticed at all the dispensaries around me, none of them had seeds available for sale. And I was like, I feel like that's like a big hole in the market, because
It is.
Like for me, I had to order at the time, I ordered from Europe, and you have to wait like a month to get your seeds, and typically you want them hidden. So there was times where I got, an order of seeds, and it was like a little children's like cloth book, that they have all these tactile sensations on it and stuff, and I had to rip it open. And there was another time it arrived, it was a baby doll, and I had to pull the leg off and reach in the body and stuff. So, I was like, that's kind of cool, but that sucks. Like, you have to wait so long. I can't just go to the store and talk to someone real quick and pick up a pack of seeds. So, I felt like, that was probably an opportunity. So I reached out to Mr. Chifa. And again, this is like 10, 15 years. Yeah, closer to 15 years after our whole raid incident. And he's a professional at this point. He doesn't even smoke or anything like that anymore. But his profession is an accountant. I feel like it's okay to say that. So, he's got a lot of knowledge when it comes to businesses and the books and how they run and everything like that. So I was like, cool. I am a software engineer. I put together this rudimentary website that can, serve as a store for the company. I've put tens of thousands of dollars of my own money into this operation. I have all this product, coming up, or planned, because at the time I didn't do my first commercial run yet. And so the plan was to have him come do the administration stuff, and I'd take care of the growing and the website. And we really tried for months and months, and eventually it was very apparent that he was just too busy, And so I just straight up, sometimes you got to do this too. In this day and age, you have to just be like, hey, you gotta let me know, like, no more pussyfooting around, like, tell me if the answer is no, you're not gonna hurt my feelings, but you're gonna have to just let me know so I can make my next move. So
Yep.
the answer was, he's not able to do it. And I'd already built up all this momentum in my mind, plus all the thousands of dollars I bought on seeds. Plus, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, one of the appealing things about having a seed company is, oh, now I can justify all my purchases of seeds that I want to buy.
Right, because you're trying to make more. Yeah,
exactly. Right. Oh, it's for the business. Of
it's
course I could buy, these packs of seeds. So,
yep.
Yeah, I mean, I pushed on forward and started researching and figuring out what it takes to create an LLC. And I found a cannabis lawyer nearby that specialized in cannabis business law. So I had a consultation with him to make sure I wasn't breaking any laws. Because, as now that I'm a software engineer, for me, my career is the most important thing. And I love growing, and I love everything like that's come from doing this. But ultimately, my main responsibility, is my job. So, as a professional, I kind of wanted to kind of stay more in the shadows too. So I was trying to get other people involved, and it wasn't working out. So again, I got the LLC. I met with the cannabis business lawyer again to make sure I wasn't breaking any laws, make sure I wasn't getting in trouble with my job or anything like that, and we're good to go. So I opened up my LLC in the summer, and I'm still working on the website because it's not up to the point where I can take orders. At that point, I was using it as an opportunity to learn React, and I'm not sure a lot of if any software engineers are out there, they'll know React is, basically the framework that Facebook made. And I'm not a big fan of Meta or any of that stuff, but I really do like React. I love the way that it almost works like Legos. So anyone who liked putting Legos together as a kid, it's the programmatic version of Legos, if you will, or it can't be used like that. But anyway, so I opened up the company and I did my first, I finished up my first run, which I utilized from Archive Seed Bank, Casper OG, and that had Ghost OG and Face Off OG, and I think it was like Backcross 3 or something like that. I'll have to look at my notes too, but in my mind, I wanted to start with a solid OG strain. And OGs, they just are notorious for being very hardy plants. This whole process, I would even say that I'm not like, I definitely have a lot of knowledge when it comes to this stuff. But during the whole process, I wasn't like the greatest grower ever. There's a lot of strains out there that are known for being finicky. And at that time, if I had one of those finicky strains, who knows if I would have, got up to the finish line. So, I mean, that doesn't sound great, but really the way that I look at it is all the strains that I worked with at in the very first beginning of, when I was growing, and before I decided to do this company, they were willing to take a lot of abuse. I put them through the ringer, and I
Sure.
feel like that is a really good thing to have. To have very hardy plants, where I used to joke back a couple years back that if I could grow these out, then anyone could grow them out. Because they're not finicky at all. Like I was able to get them to the finish line despite how many problems I battled and everything like that. So that was another thing that I really look for in my plants is just how hardy are they? How much abuse can they take? Because
Do you
it's
apply any sort of abiotic stressors to your plants currently, where you're like physically trying to create extra stresses in order to like proof out genetics or anything like that?
so that is the plan going forward. So at this time, I should probably do a little bit of a summary because I know we're about an hour, close to an hour and a half here, and I don't want to bore anybody. But my game plan in the beginning was to make several F1 lines and just do a bunch of that initial legwork. Just I have all these plants that I grew from seeds, all these different phenos. Some of them are really interesting. Some of them are probably close to what they should be. What you expect to get from those seeds. And I wanted to take that opportunity to try to get as many different crossings as possible. And it's not that I saw that they were going to be all viable, like very perfect crossings. There were some crossings that I knew were going to work out very strongly, and those ones I absolutely put on my site. But there's a lot of crosses that I made that are not available on the site at all, and it's because either I didn't get enough seeds where I felt like they can be something I can put in packs and have, X amount of packs to offer to people, or it's because I didn't think that they were going to actually, produce something that was going to be worthwhile to, have someone not just pay their hard-earned money for, but spend the time and resources to grow it out, So, the first phase that I basically did is I want to create as many different F1s that I can do, and then after that I can switch over to starting to work with those F1s and bring them to F2s and beyond. And at that point, my plan was to narrow my focus and, kind of start drilling down on these strains that I started. However, something interesting happened last year. Right as I finished my fourth line, the widower line, which I used, was it a widow cake, which is wedding cake times black widow. That's from People Under the Stairs. I've had some really good experience with their stuff too. So shout out to the People Under the Stairs. So right as I finished up my last line, one of the moderators, the fellow moderators on Craft, let me know about this website. I'm not even going to say the name because they're a bunch of clowns. But at the time, we thought to the best of our knowledge that they were legit, and so I spent almost $2,000 at the very end. I spent $1,200 for a full order. Because when I do things, I go all out. So I ordered a bunch of plants, and then
And
that's
these are
around the time
clones or seeds?
clones. So I ordered a bunch of clones, and that's the time when I started learning about HLVD, hop latent viroid disease, also known as the Dunning disease. And that's when I realized how big of a problem that viroid is and how serious it is. And luckily, I had the foresight to go ahead and quarantine those clones that I got. But after some encouragement from some people on Reddit, I went ahead and I paid the extra $400 or so to get the tests, and I tested those clones. And I think out of the 12 clones that I had, the first test revealed 4 of them had hop latent viroid disease. And so I'm freaking out. I throw those 4 away. I'm like, fuck, man, that's $400, not to mention the cost of the test, in the trash. And then, of course, you can't do just one round of testing because even if a plant's healthy, it could still be infected, and that virus, the viroid load, is not great enough for it to be detected in the test. So you just have to give it a little bit extra time. So I waited another 2 weeks, and I retested the 8 remaining strains, and another 4 tested positive. So at that point, I was like, that's it. Like, I'm not going to pay for another round of testing. I just threw them all out. And that sucked. That's $1,600 that I just threw in my garbage. Not to mention all the time that it took up in my room and me stressing about it. But the
And
one
we don't have to talk about where you source these from if you don't want to, but can you describe the experience that you had when you reached back out to this company to explain the situation that you went through third party testing to make sure that it was clean, stuff that was claimed to be clean to you initially. And since they were quarantined, they didn't have other interactions potentially with other contaminations other than what would have been occurred at the original source point. But yeah, explain a little bit more about the interactions that you then had with these people. I feel like
yeah,
that's very
so
important for the community to hear.
I reached out to the shop owner and I let him know, and he was not very friendly at all. I sent screenshots of proof, and he was basically telling me there's nothing he's going to do for me. And then he found one of my Reddit posts and was like, "Is this you? Is this you?" And so he was at that point ignoring my questions, and he was coming hostile with finding my posts. And so I felt like, yeah, this guy has all my information. I'm not going to worry about this much longer because it seems like he's getting ready to dox me, and basically, hey, here's this guy's phone number, his address, like everything, So at that point, I just had to walk away, and then I did my duty of letting the community know, like, hey, don't ever fuck with this company ever. Here's my experience, and I think I held off on telling people about him like threatening me just to give it a little time so he wouldn't dox me. But yeah, that definitely happened. And at that point too, I made my LinkedIn private because again I was like, if this guy's gonna go out as a vendetta, I don't want him to like try to contact the company I work for or anything like that. Like at that point, I just felt like it was better to let other people know and just walk away and take the hit myself. But
Did
the
he
one
accept responsibility at all for the hop slate and viroid, or did he basically try to say that your testing was false or something along those
I would say
lines?
none of the above. Just not really acknowledgement on his end. Just like nothing you can do. Like oh well, sorry. Like
Wow.
so. The one good thing that came out of that because there were a lot of. I mean, another thing I'll say about these companies is you never know if what they're selling is the actual strain that they're selling. They can just pick any plant and they can send it to you, and even if you grow it out, unless you really know that strain very well or someone who does, you never really know what you're getting. It could be bomb as hell. It could be pretty close to the terps that it's supposed to be. But I mean, realistically, unless you're doing genetic testing to compare the genes of the plants, you really can't tell what you're getting.
For
Like we
sure.
were talking about earlier, that Tahoe OG. If I didn't know that it was Tahoe OG, and I looked at those nugs and I smelled the terps, I would think it was SFE OG
For
because it's
sure.
so similar.
You just have that like slightly different rounding to the top of the buds versus the peaks of the SFEOG.
Yeah. And another thing too, like I've really been diving into the differences between chemotypes, phenotypes, and genotypes.
Right.
There's some really interesting articles too, and really, I feel like the way that we use the term phenotype, it's actually it seems like it's incorrect compared to the definition, because a phenotype is not just the genetics presenting in the plant, but it's also the way the environment impacts that plant.
Yep.
So you can have like a pheno is all the different ranges that plant's able to produce depending on the environment.
Yeah. The phenotype does. Yeah. The phenotype for a single cultivar would range, and
Uh-huh.
then the genotype is what that individual cultivar is, and then the chemotype is the expression in a given environment.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So I've been trying to learn a lot more about about breeding and about the terminology, so I don't I don't sound like just someone who works out of his home here.
It's it's one of those things though that it like just with your like programming and stuff, you can easily look into a lot of these different things. And I feel like there are a lot of people that want to get into breeding, even if it's just to like, chuck some pollen in a tent or something just to see what happens. I feel like people think that it needs to be this ultra precise scientific approach, where as long as you can take notes and you can use your anecdotal evidence to guide you, there's a lot of people that have created some phenomenal phenomenal genotypes.
Yeah. And my knowledge might be a little outdated too, but I don't know if there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if there's a lot of literature out there on proven dominant genes and recessive genes in cannabis. There's probably some anecdotal stuff out there, but I don't know if there's anything like this is for sure a dominant gene. This is for sure a recessive gene.
There's some through like companies like Phylos Bioscience, but due to some controversies that the cannabis community faced when these different genetics mapping laboratories opened up initially, they lost a lot of faith with the community because of certain practices that were claimed to be, and then what actual practices then occurred, and how, because the cannabis community was so tightly knit and held so many of these cultivars very closely guarded within tight knit communities. When somebody then says, we're going to make sure that we're just getting you the information for this so that you can use that information in your breeding practices, and then takes that information to use it within their own internal breeding practices, as well as genetic acquisition maneuvers. So there is information out there. Yes, to answer your question, there are certain specific traits, whether it be like cannabinoid profiles, terpene profiles, flower morphologies, pigmentations, recessive and dominant traits for height, flower structure, flowering time, all these different things. They have been able to map them to specific loci, but getting access to that information now is also gatekept behind typically massive paywalls.
Yeah, I mean, when I did a lot of this initial research, it's before it was even recreationally legal in California. So
Right.
here we are. How many years? 12, I think 2012, if I remember. I think that's when,
What
is it
for?
2012, 2016?
I think it would have been 2016 or 17 that it went I think it was voted on in 2016, and then it went into effect 2017, because
Yeah, you're
my
right. You're right.
my partner and I left California in 2016, and we both had our 215 cards still, and then we came back, and you could go to the dispensaries, the same dispensaries that we could only go in with a medical license before. We could just walk in with our ID. And that was it was weird being away for a little bit, coming back, and it being totally different.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, we've had legal weed for what, almost 8 years now, and I feel like with the legality coming, it reduces a lot of the clandestineness, like the fact that you have to remain hidden with what you're doing. There's a lot more home growers growing. There's a lot more companies that are don't have to be so secretive about what they're doing. So I feel like the research that's coming out now, it's a lot more easy to access it than it was before, and there still is a lot of bro science that goes around, but I think it's a lot less than what we previously had to deal with. So
For sure. I mean, look, we're still both using pseudonyms to display ourselves to the community, to have some level of anonymity. There's still a huge stigma.
yeah, I mean, federally, it's not legal, so
No. I always got to remind myself of that.
I know. Anytime I travel, it's just so weird, especially if you travel to a state where it's not legal. It's just like, this is just bizarre.
Yeah.
How do you people live like this?
And it's crazy to think that like you can fly out of JFK in New York and they don't care if you're carrying cannabis. You can fly out of SFO in San Francisco. They don't care if you're carrying cannabis, but yeah, you touch down in Kentucky, you're fucked.
Yeah.
So,
Although,
yeah, I mean,
I'll say from experience, having a pen in your backpack's not that big of a deal.
nah.
I visited my brother
Allegedly.
in Tennessee, and I was like, allegedly, I visited in Tennessee, and it was no big deal.
For sure. Well,
yeah, kind of getting back to the one good thing that came out of that whole fucking clusterfuck of buying those diseased clones was that's when I started learning about tissue culture, because I was obsessed with not throwing my money away. And a lot of those strains, we start talking about this, but a lot of those strains of what they were supposed to be, and I was just at the time assuming they were what they were. They were things that I bought seed pack after seed pack. One of them was Bruce Banner #3. And, I bought that knockoff one, but I also bought a ton of stuff that had Bruce Banner mixed in just because it had it mixed in. The same thing with a lot of those breeder cuts. I bought so many packs of seeds because it was mixed with GMO. And I wanted, GMO, but I didn't know anybody. And there was one clone company, that I found right after the pandemic. And I have not been able to find any information on them ever since. It was called OG Life in San Bernardino, California. It was a breeder collective. I think I found it online, just searching clones near me. And I only have one clone left from them, which sucks because they were all really good. At the time, I got SFEOG, Sour Diesel, and Sour Diesel is the only one I have left. Let's see here. Strawberry Milkshake, which is one I haven't really heard of, but the picture on their website sold me. It was super frosty. And I knew I wanted one that was going to be good for, making bubble hash. Jack Herrera, Gorilla Glue #4, and then Girl Scout Cookie Thin Mint. So I had all 6 of those from that company. Luckily, out of the ones that remained, I did test them, and none of them had HLVD. That was years later, so I got lucky with that, because that was way before I knew about HLVD. But yeah, so sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but
no, please, just why don't you kind of talk about how you started your journey into tissue culture?
Yes.
What resources did you sort of seek out, and then where do you feel as though you found the best information? Because it sounds like almost with everything else that you do, you were self-taught in the tissue culture space as well.
Yeah, if there's a will, there's a way. Just like programming, just like everything. The main thing that's going to be required of you is your drive, for that knowledge. And it doesn't matter how many resources you have if you don't have that curiosity and that desire to learn more and to build off of what you've already learned, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get far. So for me, I had that obsession, about trying to save those clones that I got from that clone, vendor. And it didn't work out, but that's what started me, learning about tissue culture, and the fact that tissue culture, especially meristem tissue culture, has the ability to basically make a new clone of that plant that is free of viroids or any systemic diseases that the plant may have, whether it's viroids or funguses, molds, like whatever, So that really interests me. And I had already dabbled a little bit in gourmet mushrooms. So I learned a little bit about mycology. I had bought a flow hood for that.
Gourmet mushrooms.
So yeah, the kind that you eat, nothing else. So
are there any other kind of mushrooms?
No. As far as I know, there's the kind that you eat for subsistence, and then there's the kind that you eat to die, right? So that's probably it.
I think that's it.
I'm not forgetting anything, So.
No.
It'd probably take my golden, thinking hat to put on, to start thinking about what other kind of mushrooms.
Your golden teacher hat?
My golden teacher hat. So I had a flow hood, and I had a little experience with making agar plates and, working on, very sterile techniques and trying to make sure that you're not putting your arm over stuff that you're working on, or, I even started before I had a flow hood. I worked in, what the fuck are they called? A still air box. It's not technically a still air box, but it's very similar to one. And actually, I'll just say a side note. From what I understand, still air boxes are not ideal because you put your arms into those those little sleeves, and you can still push air inside the box by moving your arms in there too. So from what I understand, doing the method where you cut the holes in like a tub is supposed to be a little bit easier because you can move a little bit more gentle and create less airflow. But I don't know. I don't have to worry about that anymore because I have the flow hood, and flow hoods are awesome. So, I had already some experience with working and, kind of a home laboratory setting, and I had already had the equipment. So I went ahead and at this point, I'd thrown away a bunch of plants, and I was really discouraged. It threw me off of what I had planned on doing by a couple months, and I vowed never to buy clones ever again. I didn't care. But a couple months later, one of the other mods on Reddit was like, "Hey, check out this Discord. This other breeder." And I promised the breeder that I won't say his name or anything like that, or whatever. But they had a falling out with one of their business partners to kind of keep it, a little generic about what's going on. But he was at a point where he was ready to start selling off the strains that he's collected over the years. So
Wow.
I started off, and he was selling it super cheap too. And I initially was like, no, but it was coming from someone else that I knew, and he had on good authority that this person was legit, and they were selling clean clones, and so I said, fuck it, let's order 3. And I think at that point I got GMO, Stardog, Cory Cut, and Zero Grav, which is kind of a newer strain. That one's like Oreos times GMO. Because I was gearing up to, at that point, I wanted to do a 5th seed run. I haven't done it, by the way. But I wanted to do to use this Star 95 male that I picked out. And it was half Stardog, half I-95. So, in my mind, I was like, okay, well, let's try. We'll get some of these. I've been chasing GMO for all these years, buying all these seeds, and this is potentially the actual GMO plant. So let's just get that, and then we can breed with it. And I tested those plants. They were all clean, all good to go. And I waited a couple of weeks, and I was like, fuck, man, he's got that list, all these other plants. And so here I am. I think I bought like over 40 from him, all these breeder cuts. And, I've tested the first 16 that I got from him, all clean, all good to go. I've grown out a ton of them. You can check them out on the Instagram, on the Reddit. They're all amazing. The terpenes are exactly, for the most part. One of them we thought was Blue Dream. I guess it got mixed up in transportation. It's not Blue Dream, unfortunately, but it's still super bomb. So that one, there was this is not what it's supposed to be. But everything else looks like it's right on the money. So basically, once that happened, I decided that I had to shift gears, because sometimes you just have to roll the punches. And instead of doing a 5th line of F1s, that might be interesting, like the Star 95 was a little bit of a longer flower. And, like we previously discussed, I want flower times around the 8 weeks is my ideal. 8 weeks is a great flowering time to shoot for. So I decided to change gears and to start getting, these breeder cuts that are available. Because it was presented to me as it was going to be a limited time thing, so sometimes you got to get it while the getting's good, you got to strike while the iron's hot. So I started collecting a bunch of these, plants, and then at that point I decided to take the tissue culture seriously. I'd already done 1 round of micropropagation, which doesn't require a microscope, but I was, according to my research, the only way to, really cure these plants of anything that they might have had, if there was any fungal infections or anything else, was through meristem. And so I went ahead and I bought a microscope, and I got that set up, and, I started researching different tissue culture, the media protocols. So, the recipe is called a protocol. That's right. A little bit of the lingo. But, I started making my own, and I did some meristems, and I noticed after a couple of weeks I was getting growth, and it was, hey, this is awesome. Like, this is actually, it feels like it's something that I can actually do, And here we are. My very first meristem I took back at the end of like August, September. This one was closer to October, so this is a Gelato 41. So this was a meristem, and now we have almost a full-on plant, and it kind of sucks because it doesn't really, I don't think it's going to focus too well, but You can see
Yeah.
here at the very bottom, we have a callus, and it's really hard to see on the camera, but I promise you, there's these little tiny white shoots of roots coming out of the callus too. So
Nice.
this is starting to root, and the significance about this is I didn't use plant growth regulators at all. This is completely done with just agar, sucrose, which is just table sugar, and M&S, which again I'm probably going to completely pronounce it incorrectly, but Marashuga and Skoog. I think that's how you say it. But essentially, it's 3 items for tissue culture media. You have something to hold things in place, so the agar, something to give the plant energy, which is the sugar, because it's no longer utilizing photosynthesis, and then something to give the plants, nutrients. It's food, and that's the MS. So Marashuga and Skoog. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at. I've really put a lot of my breeding aspirations on the back burner while I figure out, how to completely pull off meristem tissue culture at my house. I have a laboratory set up in my living room. It's not ideal, but it works. I've had some really good success from it, and luckily, especially through this podcast, we've been meeting some amazing people. In fact, we just talked to Jesse this morning, and he was giving us all sorts of very valuable information. And I know, unfortunately, it was before we hit record. Sorry, people, but I was able to
Don't worry,
have
we
him
got
on.
into some good stuff.
We really did, and I know actually, come to think of it, if you watch that podcast, I don't say anything during the entire thing. And, which is unfortunate, because I didn't really contribute to what you guys are going to see. But I was very fortunate because I was able to talk to Jesse before we hit record. And I had a lot of questions that would take me forever to Google. And who knows if I'd even get the right answer directly answered for me, and it's just
Do you want to
incredible.
touch on any of those things that you felt were like little tidbits of information that you're still now like chomping at the bit to start either testing out or
Yeah, I
otherwise?
mean, so he let us know he was going to share some of his protocols with us. So I'm very interested to kind of see how he mixes stuff. One thing he mentioned was it seems like he's making his own. And the thing about when we're talking with people too is we want to give them a lot of space to say everything that they want to say. So there's going to be times where I have burning questions and I don't get a chance to ask it. But it seems like he's making his own nutrient solution for cannabis. Because he had a lot of things that he was talking about where, in MS, there's certain nutrients inside that mixture that are not appropriate for cannabis because that mixture is actually made for basil, if I'm not mistaken. It's specifically for growing basil. But, as tissue culture has come more into the cannabis community, people found that it works good enough, for cannabis. It's not perfect, but it works, and that's kind of the theme for me. Like sometimes if it works, man, it works. Like let's get some stuff accomplished.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I'm very excited for the next step. I'm going to be start working with some PGRs myself. I have them already in my fridge, and it's just a matter of experimenting with the right ratios. So I know I'm probably going to pronounce it incorrectly again, but we have auxins and cytokinins, which are 2 categories of the main types of plant growth regulators. And one of the tidbits that that's really just kind of impacted me lately is, auxins typically are, to help rooting. Like if you were just to kind of break it down to the bare necessities, like there's different auxins and they do different things, depending on what auxin it is. But overall, the category, is to help establish roots. And then cytokinins is to help establish, shoot growth or the way that Jesse put it this morning is, auxins are for below and cytokinins are for above. So, that's a very valuable piece of information. But another thing that I've really learned is they work in conjunction with each other. So those plant growth regulators actually regulate each other as well, depending on the concentration of each one. So
And for the listeners out there, we're using the term plant growth regulators, and there is a lot of stigma within the cannabis growing space about plant growth regulators simply because some of them that are used to control flower structure growth can end up leaving toxic residues that can be harmful to human consumption when combusted. But a lot of what we're talking about, whether it be something that's like naphthalene acetic acid or endol-3 butyric acid, or other auxins and cytokinins, these things occur naturally within the plant, and we're just applying them exogenously, so from outside the plant, to help promote the same growth patterns that they would promote within the plant endogenously.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say this right now too: if you clone and you use root growth hormones, that's a plant growth regulator right there.
Yes.
So you're probably already utilizing that in your your techniques. So one thing, and again, this is one of the many articles that I found, and Jesse was able to kind of confirm, is a high auxin to low cytokinin ratio favors root formation. A low auxin, high cytokinin favors shoot formation, and then a balanced auxin and cytokinin maintains undifferentiated callus growth. And the way that I view undifferentiated calluses is it's very similar to stem cells, where they're malleable cells, where depending on the hormones that are being introduced to those cells, determine what direction those cells grow in. Are they going to be a shoot? Are they going to be roots? Are they going to, there's several different, stages that you can basically manipulate using plant growth regulators.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great touch on kind of your journey through and so far with tissue culture, and I feel like that also kind of brings us up to almost your current stage as a cultivator in general. Starting from a speaker, moving into a rented room that eventually got raided, to now growing at home and following these different sort of steps and developments within your cultivation journey based on almost, sometimes it may have been barriers that you faced, like with receiving contaminated plants, to wanting to increase your productivity as a grower overall within that space that you have. As most home growers know, you limited space, even with a high plant count of say 99 plants, is still, it's never enough. You could always have more space. You can always do more. And then with limited time also comes other restraints. But considering your journey has really stayed something that you've kind of developed yourself, and it doesn't sound like there's been too many outside influences in terms of how the cultivation industry as a whole has sort of developed. Like you're not beholden to working with a commercial space or through a breeders collective that requires a certain amount of output, or a clone collective where you're providing clones for resale to people. So through your unique lens, what do you see within the cannabis industry and community overall that you feel like could change for the better?
Well, that's a good question. I would say as laws become more relaxed and it's not such a big deal to get into cannabis as a hobby, we're going to see a more established community, not just a community of hobbyists and enthusiasts who, may potentially throw caution to the wind, to have an online presence, and even me, as someone who views himself as a professional, I still don't want to be all out there and, I don't want to be known as like the weed guy at work, I love cannabis and I love growing, and I've loved the community that comes with it too, but it's not my whole life either. I have a lot of other things, a lot of other interests that, get me excited and, that I want to work on. One of the things it's kind of taking a back seat because of the, tissue culture, but I'm working on an album right now, I know how to play like whatever instrument that I pick up, and within the last, it's been a little bit over a year now, but I figured out how to scream, and so and it sounds fucking dope, like I I think it sounds pretty good. And with this whole studio here, I want to sit down and finish the album that I started. I have it's 13 songs. One of the songs is an intro, but they're all recorded. They're all mapped out, and it's a matter of re-recording them and redoing those vocals. But that's another thing that I want to get accomplished. And I think that's going to be
For sure.
probably one of my goals this year.
I mean, it sounds like because of the fact that we have to still somewhat, you know, be a little bit withheld with from how we expose ourselves outside of the immediate cannabis community. It almost sounds like you'd like to see the stigma be lifted a little bit more so that you can incorporate these aspects of your life, whether it be the consumption of cannabis, the breeding of cannabis, the growing of cannabis, and all those different things that you now spend a lot of your time on, to be just as easy to talk about as the fact that you're also creating an album of your own music, through your own creative endeavors. And that's something that you can go to the bar. You don't drink, but you can go out to dinner. You can go and hang out with friends from work and talk about your musical endeavors in an open way that doesn't necessarily require a mask to be pulled down over your identity. Whereas you may not necessarily feel the same level of comfortability talking about, hey, I breed cannabis in my spare time. I do cannabis meristem tissue culture in my spare time. I have all these growing endeavors that I'm doing on my own time. And it feels like you almost have to cut a piece of yourself out to be able to fit in to the cookie that is the current U.S. Political sphere.
I totally agree. Like, there's times where, especially if I've been like hardcore focused on cannabis, like I've been tissue culturing every day, 10-hour days, and I'm like just up to my eyeballs, and I get out to someone where I have to be a little bit more square, so you say, so to say.
Sure.
I feel like I'm so boring. Like, I have nothing to talk about. I'm like, this person must think that I'm just like the most bland person when I'm like, dude, I want to tell you about all this fucking shit, but
Because
But
everything
you brought up another
interesting on
point.
your mind is not appropriate,
Yeah.
unfortunately, right?
But you brought another point up too. Like, something I would love to see is a place you can go and smoke just like a bar, a cannabis centered bar. Because, after I stopped smoking, obviously I wasn't hanging out at bars anymore. So, like, as a kind of pardon me, as a cannabis user, we don't have that place of community where we can go to and physically hang out and smoke with each other, and like without having to worry about like cops rolling up, or whatever
Sure.
it is. Or, I mean, yeah, we could do it at someone's house, but it's definitely not the same as being able to go to a public place, that you never know. Like, oh, my homie's going to show up, maybe, like he's there sometimes, and you never know like who you're going to see and what kind of conversations going to come. So, I mean,
For sure. I
I
mean,
feel like as cannabis,
it's
as California sober, like I don't get that.
yeah. And I feel like, using some form of social lubricant, whether it be having a drink at a bar or, pulling out a joint and passing it around a bunch of friends at a barbecue or something like that. I feel like there's just something in humans that love that act of sharing something together and having this sort of either talking point or something that helps release a little bit of the inhibitions that are placed on us by either societal pressures or in-group pressures or other things like that make it so it's like hard to talk about this or that. But with a little something to help break the ice, so to speak, the mental ice, it does seem that, like, yeah, why can't there just be a place where people can consume cannabis together and hang out and talk and do all the things that people do at bars? I've heard from plenty of cops that they'd rather deal with 100 stoned people than 10 drunk people.
Hmm.
Like 10 drunk people are going to cause an exorbitant amount more damage potentially than 100 stoned people could ever create. Um, yeah, that's a really good point. We do need some form of consumption lounge, or I don't
That
even know
communal
what that would
location
look
where we
like.
can meet up and we can bake up.
Yeah, why not? I feel like it. it should happen. Hopefully it happens. I know that there's some states like New York where it was written into the legislation initially that there would be consumption lounges or places
Mhm.
where the public could go and consume, and it wouldn't just be something that's a private club. So, they're circumventing the law by making it membership only. So your membership makes it so that it's kind of like you own part of that property, and so you're basically smoking in your own home, and they can't tell you can't do that. But yeah, there needs to be something there without so many loops and hoops to jump through. But okay, yeah. So I see how, you know breaking down the stigma, making it more available for society to partake in as a whole, just like we do with all these other things. Those are some great ways to see the community sort of develop over the next 5 to 10 years.
I would say one other thing I want to see too, and especially as tissue culture becomes more prevalent in the industry, is I want to see a lot more clean plants out there. I don't want anyone to have to deal with what I had to deal with last year, and have to throw away plants or risk contaminating the plants that you've been working on for years. So hopefully we can move away from shady people in the industry who are here just to make a quick buck, and get those people replaced with people who actually have a passion for cannabis and are here because they want to share the joy of growing with other people. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
I did want to take an opportunity to do a couple shout outs to some of the seed banks that I really like. This cool shirt that I'm wearing right here is from North Atlantic Seed Co.
That's dope.
From what I understand, it's like a woman-run seed company in Massachusetts, and they have a lot of really good brands on that seed bank. But one thing that really stood out to me, not just to mention like whenever you place an order, they're super quick, tons of freebies, on whatever you order. But anytime if I ever had a question or anything, I was always able to reach out to that company, and they would promptly reach back with very, very friendly, kind emails. When I first started Cosmic Strains, I reached out to them, just to get some more information about getting brands on there, and super nice, encouraging email back. So I just wanted to give a shout out if you're looking for a place to get seeds. That's where I got a lot of my genetics from, North Atlantic Seed Company.
Awesome.
Another one that I really liked was Attitude. I use Attitude UK, which I think it's based in Spain now. But that was before I kind of was aware of more than the North Americans. But I did get a lot of genetics from Attitude. So I just wanted to kind of, because that was another portion of my research is figuring out where to get these seeds from, So, maybe me pointing those companies out that I had some, good success with, it might help some people out there. So, yeah, check
For
out
sure.
North Atlantic Seed Co. and Attitude. I understand that they have a U.S. branch now if you're in America, so you can order a lot quicker. But, shout out to those seed banks.
For sure. That's a great little shout out, great little plug for uh, where to get good genetics.
I mean, I love plugging things that work for me.
Right.
Like I don't have any. I'm not promoting anything. And getting stuff in return. Like these are just companies that I appreciate. Like another one that I really like. Actually, here let me grab this piece because we can see it. Hold on, just a second. I have a little glass collection up there. But there's this company called Glassberry or Glassberry Cupcake. And I love the old school kind of
That's a
heavy
cool
pieces.
bubbler.
And I spent a lot of time trying to track down some of those pieces I remember looking at and seeing in head shops back when I was in high school. And I couldn't really find these like crazy ones, or some of them were just like too crazy where it was like they wanted like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And yeah, it looks cool, but I'm never going to smoke out of that because what happens if I drop it?
Yeah.
So I found this company, and they make just some of those heady pieces that I was really hoping to find.
Cool.
So yeah,
Nice,
shout out to
dude.
them too.
Well, since you're kind of giving a few recommendations, let's tie it into growing a little bit. And what would be a tip or a piece of advice that you would give to a new grower based on the experience that you have?
I would say it depends on really who I'm talking to. Like if they're just getting into it, it depends on your financial situation about how much you want to put into this. Is this really a hobby that you want to pursue, or is this something that you're just kind of dipping your toe in? That will probably help determine how much you should spend on your first setup. Where you're growing, like what's that place like? Is it an environment that you can control easily? Is it a place that you don't have to worry about smells? Is it a place that you can get water easily? Those are all concerns when it comes to growing. So for me, I went with for the majority, the tents pardon me, I have downstairs are grow tents. They cost a little bit extra, but I've had them for years now, and they're still just as good condition as when I first bought them.
Nice.
However, like this video sun here, I just got a cheapo one because I needed, I running out of space downstairs, and I had a different Vivio Sun one where the zipper completely came off of the zipper track, and there was no way for me to put it back, and eventually I had to just throw that tent away. So I am a firm believer of buy nice or buy twice, but you have to have to keep in mind how far are you going to take this. Is it really worth it to buy really nice equipment right away? I grow LED lights now. I feel like the technology has come to a point where it's not just really efficient, whether it's, just cost wise, they're usually at a really good price point. They don't produce a lot of heat, which that's always been a traditional concern, especially with like high pressure sodiums, metal halides, like all those lights produce a lot of heat, and you have to figure out how to remove that heat. So LEDs is a lot less of a concern. And then power consumption too. They're able to be a lot more efficient than your traditional grow lights. So I mean, it's not like it's more of a budget brand, but I've had really good experience with Mars Hydro, and I've got those lights off of Amazon and Walmart. So I mean, you can basically find them anywhere. But Mars Hydro, I've had really good experience.
Did you say Walmart?
Yeah, I bought them off of Walmart.com. A couple of them. Well,
That's
Walmart's
good for
trying to do
people
the
to
thing
know.
where Amazon, a lot of those companies are doing it where they're trying to be like the marketplace, and then they have a lot of
Right.
different sellers on it. So you're not going to find those grow lights at a Walmart, but you could find it on their site.
If I walked into a Walmart and saw Mars Hydro sitting on a shelf, I'd say, well, it looks like growing is going to be legal soon.
Yeah. Or growing's no longer cool. It's like
Oh my
watching your
God.
parents do something
Yeah,
that you
right?
thought was cool. Like, oh
Oh,
God,
oh God
is that
damn
what
it.
I look like when I do that?
Motherfucker, I don't want to do
Yeah,
this anymore. Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, well, that's a good piece of advice. I feel like the one that a lot of growers should take away is, or it's kind of a two-parter, right? So, know what you want to do to get into it. Like, know what you're aiming to get out of it. Is it something where you just are like, I want to see how cannabis plants grow? Then, yeah, you might want to start with something cheaper, maybe a smaller tent, maybe use a closet that you already have and just throw a light in there and see what happens. Um, or if you're like, no, I love cannabis and I want to grow my own, and I know that I'm going to do this for a little bit, then yeah, you might want to go about the idea of buy once, cry once, and buy yourself something that's a little bit better, or invest in yourself a little bit more, depending on if you have a space where you can build out part of a room like you did with that first room where you framed it out, and you can put in a little bit more air exchange and air control, and environmental controls and things like that, or a really nice like a Gorilla Grow tent, which are probably, I'd say those and like AC Infinities are probably some of the best tents you can get on the market right now, for their price points. And
I love AC Infinity for I use them for inline fans, and just amazing.
yeah,
So
Ace,
actually, I just recently got some oscillating fans that clip on your tent pole,
like the
so you
little
can have
four
that whatever
inchers.
height that you want, and it doesn't take
Yeah,
up floor space. They're fucking so sick, dude. AC
yeah,
Infinity
those
is
things
awesome.
are
Yeah.
great. I love that they now have the different controllers that can interface all these different pieces of equipment, whether it be a humidifier, dehumidifier, your lighting control, your fan controls, all these different things that you can tie in together, where that was something that was pretty much only reserved for commercial grow spaces through things like GrowLink or Arroya or Open Sprinkler, or all these different programs that required some sort of subscription service. And the initial overhead cost was typically like even at the base level where it's like, oh, this is enough for you to run one room at scale. And then you look into it, and it's like $18,000 with like $300 per month subscription service. And you're like, dude, I'm growing in like 5/10. I don't need, I can't afford that. That's more than my entire setup just to look at it through a computer. So a lot of people, that didn't make sense until Arroyo started putting out a lot of really, really nice, or not Arroyo, sorry, AC Infinity started putting out a lot of really nice equipment for home growers. And another one that I like to shout out would be EcoWitt, ECOWITT. You can find a lot of their products on Amazon, but they have like a home hub that connects to a bunch of different wireless pieces of monitoring equipment. So you can have substrate monitoring for the moisture content. You can have environmental monitoring for, you can go as deep as like wind speed, lighting, humidity, temperature, vapor pressure deficit. And you can use all those things to kind of make controlled adjustments within your environment to make sure that you're growing as optimally as possible for the plants. So all those things, little things here and there that new growers can use, I feel like to make sure that they're doing something and that they can then correlate that to data if that's how their mind works and if that's how they like to go about it. I think that that's a great thing for new growers.
Dude, I totally want to build my own hub. I have like all the sensors and have I ever talked to you about Raspberry Pis before?
Yeah.
Do you know what that is? Yeah. So just for our viewers that don't know, I think I actually have one around here somewhere. So a Raspberry Pi is a single board computer. Here's what it looks like on the inside. Just one board. It's got like the heat sink. I got a little fan, but it's basically the size of a credit card. And I have one of these downstairs next to my internet router, and that actually runs my website. So I have it as a web server, hosting my website. But you can use them for all different projects. They're fucking so cool, dude. Like Raspberry Pis, and then in the same vein, Arduinos. Arduino's another single board computer. But utilizing those little single board computers, you can using like a bread board, which is, if you remember from movies and you've seen those phone operators and they have all those different switches and stuff, it's kind of similar to that. But you can hook up those sensors and then write programs to interact with the sensors. So I have a sensor for moisture in the soil. I have one for it's supposed to tell you like water temperature. So I think there's water temperature and then there's water levels too. So there's this one sensor where, yeah, actually the sensor would sit at the bottom, and when the water level goes like below a certain point, it will send a signal. So you can tell if your water reservoir is getting too low.
It's like a pressure sensor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Those are so cool.
Probes too. And then I saw this project on YouTube called the Raspberry Pi Bartender, and it was utilizing, these little pumps, and it was all hooked up to like one was hooked up to a bottle of vodka, one was hooked up to orange juice, and a bunch of different drinks and the mixers. And then on the front of what they built, they can say, "I want a screwdriver." Put the glass down under the dispenser and press the button.
Makes it.
And then the computer using those pumps would do X parts of vodka and then X parts of orange juice to make the screwdriver.
Is that just like peristatic pumps, the ones that kind of twirl against the silicone tubing? Yeah.
So I was like, you can utilize those with your nutrients, with your pH up, pH down, and have those sensors. And you could basically have it dispense X amount of nutrients in your reservoir. And then, of course, you have, the water mixing all around from your pumps and stuff. And then every 20 minutes, it would do a reading of the pH. And if the pH is off of the range that you want, you could use the same pumps, put in, X amount of pH up or pH down, whatever it needs to go.
Yeah.
And have it cycle 20 more minutes. So I was like, dude, I have all these ideas of a project that I want to do to make.
Have you seen Neurovine?
No, I haven't.
So Neurovine is basically that exactly, and it uses like a recirculating pump and then a bunch of peristatic pumps with the different nutrients as well as pH up and pH down, and a pH probe and sensor, and then you can also link it to your substrate monitoring, and it's all controlled through one hub. So yeah, if you can make a copy of what they're doing already, so many people would find so much use in that. And if it can all be ran off of Raspberry Pi and people can, if you open source that software for the little Raspberry Pi hardware, there'd be a lot of people that would benefit from that.
I want to see if I can do it. I mean, that's kind of like the theme with everything I do. Is like, can I do it? Let's try.
Yeah, why not?
Another thing too. Because I know we're getting to the point where we should probably wrap up. One piece of advice I want to give growers too is things don't have to be perfect for you to get results. When I first, way before I had my little company here and before I had any aspirations of being, a breeder, back when I was learning about pollen and, the techniques, there was one point where I had a ton of plants in my backyard shed, a bunch of males that I was just like, let's just flower them out. We'll collect the pollen one at a time. And if I get around to utilizing the pollen, cool. But if not, no big deal. At least I don't have to keep these males alive anymore. They're not high priority. I have these other males I know for sure I want to do runs with, but these ones are a maybe. So I collected a bunch of different pollen. Now the problem was out in my shed in the backyard, somehow we got a spider mite infestation, and it was bad. Like to the point where I was lucky that I was able to get the plants past 3 weeks of flower. Wow. It was such a bad infestation. And so what I did is I went to Walmart and I got a bunch of moving boxes, and they're like medium size. They were like $1.50, $2 a pop. And I would set that up. I would lay tinfoil on the bottom of it. And so, I taped up the bottom, or, you fold the bottom so it's not going to fall out. And then at the top, I would, on two sides across from each other, cut like 3 holes. And then I would feed string in across the top, and I would hang the buds. So they're hanging at the top of the cardboard, and then any of the pollen would fall down to, the tinfoil at the bottom there. And so I was like, well, fuck, man, like, I don't want to bring any of this in my house. It's infested with spider mites, and I'm not going to be able to get spider mites off the plant material, but I'm going to still try to collect the pollen. So one by one, I took all those plants and I, put them in those boxes, and I put them in my garage. And I'm in Southern California here, where our summers are getting, 115, no problem. So it was in the garage for about 2 months in summer heat. And by all accounts, on everything that I've researched, that pollen should have not been viable at all. It should have been just completely dead. And, again, I was just doing the best I could, like, what am I going to do? Just throw it all out? We might as well try. So there was a point before, this is way before I did my company and everything. I had, at that point, before I did the line using the Pineapple Passion smoothie mill, I collected some of that from, that instance when it was in the garage. Again, it shouldn't have been viable, so I had a vial of it. And a couple months down the line, I was having trouble cloning one of my plants that was already in flower. And so in order for me to be like, well, I had the potential right now to lose my pineapple upside down cake plant because, I haven't been able to successfully have it root, and it's already week 2 of flower. So I took that pollen that I collected, again, shouldn't have been viable at all, and I used my little paintbrush and I painted, a couple of the bigger nugs on that plant, and lo and behold, they were fully pollinated. I had so many seeds in there. So
that's
my
awesome.
point to everyone is shoot for perfection, but don't let it get in the way of progress, because you'd be surprised, even if things aren't optimal, about what you can pull off. Just
right on.
Give your chance to try it,
Right on. That's a great way to kind of end the talk about cannabis cultivation and breeding. I feel like, perseverance and persistency will really pay off in a lot of ways if you don't let things stand in your way in terms of failures or how someone else says it has to be done, or just because just because it's been told to you, there's absolutely no way that can work. If you think that it can work, especially when it comes to something that's as esoteric as a plant, where like we still don't know all the different processes that the roots have and relations that they'll have with mycelial colonies, like endophytes. Like we're not 100% sure on all these different things. So when someone says that they're 100% sure something won't work, that's when you can be sure that they're full of shit, because that you can't be 100% on almost anything in this life. So
Only Siths deal in absolutes.
only Siths.
Yeah.
Yes, only Siths deal in absolutes. That's a great callback. Love that. All right, well, let's get into a couple of these little wrap up questions, just so we can wrap this up for the guests or for the listeners here. So, what's your favorite strain of all time?
Shit, man. I mean, there's a lot of contenders, but I gotta say SFEOG. That's
Nice.
just such a solid, and the history that I have with that strain, it's always going to be really close to my heart. And unfortunately, I think I've lost my SFEOG clone that I had from OG Life back in 2020. I have it on my shelf here in tissue culture, but that culture is not looking too good.
Oh no.
It's been a learning process, but no problem. Our homie Gabby has assured me that when I'm ready, I can purchase it from him there. So
Cool.
no worries. And one thing too, like that I've really had to accept in my heart, because it's so hard. I love all these strains, but I got to remember that I have strains that I've made, but the majority of these breeder cuts that I have, they're just someone else's creation. So it's not exactly my responsibility to make sure that these strains don't die out, because someone else probably has them. So that's part of the process too, is learning to let go, learning to accept what is and what is not.
I've held on to plants for way too long in the commercial setting, just because you hear how much they cost and you go, "Oh my god, I don't want to lose that." But, most people, it's like you break that barrier to entry, they'll just send you another cut if you fuck it up. It's not that expensive to just pay for shipping again. You already showed the initiative of wanting it. So, yeah, that's a good little extra bit of tidbit there. Little bonus tidbit of information for new growers is be okay with letting go of plants.
Yeah.
Don't hold on to plants for too long if they're not worth it, whether it be health or pest pressure, pathogen pressure, just inability to clone. Don't worry about it. There's plenty more plants out there.
I'm already pretty deep in it right now with my tissue culture stuff. So
Right.
I don't want to get to the point where I have to be like, okay, well, maybe trying to hold on to all these strains isn't working out. So,
I mean, with tissue culture, though, you have that ability to hold on to a lot more than you would otherwise. And once you get your methodologies down, it shouldn't be something that is like even a question. You'll be able to put stuff in culture and kill the plant the same day.
yeah. Yeah. And I've already done that. Like when I first started, I had so much confidence. And so this Gelato 41,
That's
I bought
it.
this, and I've never grown this out. This is something I bought from Breeders Direct. We have the little tidbit about Breeders Direct, where Gabby sells his clones. But yeah, I bought that plant just to put into culture. So
That's funny. I mean, hey, if you're going all in, might as well, right?
yeah, well, I mean, the way I look at it too is I'm very fortunate, where again, because of my job, it pays for all my bills and then some. So I do have somewhat of a disposable income where I can just kind of throw money, at those strains, and hopefully I can get it to work out. So
For sure.
I mean, some of those strains that I bought, like the strawberry diesel, I'm not so sure if I'm going to be able to have it get through the tissue culture process. And that's okay. Like an expensive lesson, but every time that I got a new order of plants, it really did help propel me to continue working. So, even if it doesn't work out, that's fine. But at the end of this, I'm going to have so much more knowledge on tissue
Right.
culture than I did when I first started. So,
That's just
and
as valuable as the plant. Yeah.
that's what I look at too. Like, I've been holding on to my strains for so long, and here we are. It hasn't even been a year, and I've been making all these connections in the community with other, awesome growers who have their own collections. And now it seems kind of silly that I held on so hard and I tried working, against all these different odds. Like we didn't even get a chance to talk about some of the pests that I've encountered. Like I actually successfully, like 3 years ago, was able to save 6 of my strains, and this is way before I had a ton of strains, but 6 of my strains from spider mites. I had a
That's a
full-on
tough
spider
one.
mite infestation
Yeah.
inside. Who knows where it came from? Whether it was the pets that we have, or my fiance loves, house plants. That's a very big potential for infecting your grow space. By the way, FYI, guys, if you get plants from like Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, like chances are they probably have pests on them. So when you bring them inside, you probably bring those pests inside.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I saved all those plants, but it was a process and it was very stressful for me. So now that I know all these people where they have amazing collections themselves, and I know like legitimate growers, people who aren't going to be selling me like disease cuts, like it doesn't feel like such a gigantic responsibility for me to make sure that these strains stay alive, because if they don't stay alive, chances are someone else still has them. So
For sure.
let go of that stress, man. It's just weed, like
It's
what are
just
we all
weed.
stressed
It's
about?
just a plant. There's billions of them out there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, okay, cool. So just one more question then. Who is your favorite breeder of all time?
That's a good question. I mean,
If you had to choose a breeder where you could choose any of their work to restart your own breeding processes, let's go about it that way, because that might help narrow it down a little bit for your specific scenario.
so thinking about that, I would probably go with one of the breeders that have been working on the same line for a very long time. So I forget which interview we were talking about this, but we touched on the fact that all these, like even these kind of higher end companies like exotic genetics, I like the stuff that I've grown from them. I've grown maybe 5 7 under 10 strains from them, so I've had a variety of stuff, and everything has been interesting, or something that was at least worth keeping around for a couple runs. So they have some really good stuff. But that being said, every single year they have like a new line of seeds, and when you think about it, those are probably just all F1s. Like they don't really talk about their breeding process with it or anything like that. But chances are those are just your initial crossing of that plant, so they're not stabilized. So if I were to start over again, I would probably go with a company that's been working with the same lines for years and years. So you're more likely to get something that's probably like an F4 or something. So Brothers Grimm is one that I grew out, that I really liked. The C99. I think we talked about that earlier with me thinking it was the most hallucinogenic strain. That's not exactly true, but they've been growing C99, and that's got its own history behind it. And if I were to say what I learned from it, I might tell it incorrectly because it's not my history to tell. But another one that I just recently got, and who knows when I'm going to be able to get to these seeds, but I got some Black Widow from Mr. Nice, and for our viewers who know cannabis history, that's the main breeder responsible for White Widow. It was a team up for Greenhouse back in the day, and they split ways, and he was able to keep his breeding stock, but he had to leave behind the name of White Widow, and that he basically redubbed it Black Widow. So they still offer Black Widow seeds, and so actually I bought 2 packs. I think it was during Black Friday, so I got 60 seeds. So one of these days I'm going to do a legit Black Widow run and see if I can find something very interesting from that. But yeah, so
Nice.
just to kind of, I've said a lot of things, but really I would find one of those companies that have been around for years and years and years and have worked with some of the same strains. So that chances are it's probably going to be stable, because there's so many F1s out there. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. Everything on my site's an F1. And I mean, we got into a little bit of why I only have F1s right now. And that's not going to be forever. I don't want to forever have just F1s, but I feel like you can have a lot more stability with someone that's been working on those strains for years versus just the flavor of the week.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. It makes me think of someone else we've talked about before in the show, Skunk Master Flex of Skunk House Genetics, where he has his Larry OG, and I think it's taken all the way to almost, I think last I've heard it was like an F9 or F10
Oh wow.
generation. So, just really intense OG, dominant terpene and structure profiles that he then bred into all the different burger strains, like the Donny Burger,
Mm-hmm.
the GMO, or not the, sorry, he bred it with GMO, I think, to get like Donny Burger and Han Solo burger and triple burger and hash burger and all these different burger strains where it's like just intense savory notes that you would find within GMO or OG or different things like that. So I totally can say that that would be something I would probably do as well if it were something where I needed to then take those genetics and continue to breed with them for whether it be medicine or effect or structure or something like that. It would make a lot of sense to choose something that's already been worked well down the familial generation.
Yeah, I mean, because think about everything now too, like F1 after F1 after F1 after F1, and it just, I mean, you've probably run into the same thing, but I've grown so many different strains from seeds, and a lot of the seeds, a lot of the strains will have a Hermy or two in them,
Yep.
and it's one of those things about modern cannabis, and it's because we've been mixing so many different things and not really giving us a chance to work with it and try to remove some of those, I guess you could say bad genes from, the gene pool. I've learned a hell of a lot since my first couple lines too, and I mean, really, the direction I was headed in with making those, those lines where I plan on working with those combinations, those new strains that I've made, in the future, that's the right direction. But I want to narrow it down and make sure that I can stabilize, some of these things that I've created. So that's definitely going to be a gold mine. But right now I'm stuck in the middle of this tissue culture stuff, and I'm even considering once I have completely, reverted the genetics back through tissue culture, and I've tested them again, make sure that they're completely clean of viroids and fungal infections and everything. I'm considering probably doing some clone offerings. We didn't even get a chance to talk about it. I know we've probably talked about it in other shows, but another very appealing aspect of tissue culture is the fact that you can store genetics on a shelf for months and months at a time, and not only does it take up very little space compared to a mother plant, but you don't have to worry about feeding and watering it. Like, it's just chilling in the container, so
Yep.
the fact that you can kind of store genetics and have an actual library where it's on the shelf and you can pull it out like you're checking out a book, and like, I think that's really awesome. So
It's a huge tool for a breeder.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so I think my future is going to be, probably some limited clone offerings, and then getting back to, I probably want to do another F1 or line or two, just so I can do some feminized seeds. Because that's another thing that people ask, is they're either really excited that I have only regular seeds, or they're very bummed I don't have any, feminized ones. So
Right.
I might do some feminized runs, but I really want to start drilling down on those F1s I made.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm sure, like myself included, the community can't wait to see what continues for Cosmic Strains and how your breeding journey continues and your tissue culture journey continues. And hopefully, we can in the future then do another episode where we can touch on where you're at then compared to where you are at now, and kind of see how your continued breeding journey develops.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting, especially if I'm able to pull off hydroponics in the tent, that we can do another way you grow, and I can, hopefully bring back some of the growing pains I had through that process, So,
Absolutely.
I'm hard headed if nothing, and I'll keep banging my head against the wall until I figure it out.
Well, with that perseverance, you're going to provide a lot of information for the community that's going to be value for a bunch of other growers. So, Cosmic, thank you so much for joining me today. And I really appreciate your time and telling your story. I really think that it'll help a lot of other people look at what they're doing, not only within cannabis, but outside of cannabis, and think, is this something that I want to do? Because the next journey is literally just you taking the incentive to start it yourself.
you know and just taking things one step at a time. Don't look at sometimes you can't look at the big picture. You just have to look at your immediate goals, and because it's a marathon. It's not something you can just sprint and finish. You have to really just continuously work at it. So I mean, that applies to a lot of things in life.
Yep, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and I want to thank the listeners too, and for checking out my story here. And I'm really just so appreciative of the community too, and all you guys are so awesome. So thank you for for giving us this chance to, be able to share our journeys and continue to talk to all these awesome people we've been talking to too, and Nick, we got to have one of these episodes on you too, so maybe
We will
I'll take
eventually.
over and I'll do your job as the host, and we can hear about your journey, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to learn about, dude, you were a chef and now you're like a commercial grower. Like that's from one, like that's crazy. That's a cool journey. And I'm sure a lot of us are going to want to hear that.
We'll save that story for another day. But until then, we'll just keep on working on building the community up, because that's the way we grow. All right. Thanks, everybody.